public hearing for our TTAC change of regulations. I just want to say that quite a few of these regulations are going to be standard changes that the staff has come up with that we've been collecting over the past, I don't know, 8 years approximately. So there's going to be a lot of those as well. And we're also going to have changes that are going to help us correspond with the changes that have been made in the TCAC or in the SIDLAC regulations. So without taking any more time, I'm just going to turn this over to Anthony and Gina. Anthony.
Yeah. I wanted to start by reading a message for everyone joining via phone. Welcome. You're currently in listen-only mode. If at any time you're disconnected from the conference call and wish to rejoin, please redial and enter the same participant code. During public comment periods, if you wish to make a comment, please press 1 and then 0. We will first hear from the attendees joining us in person, and then from callers taken in the order they have joined the queue to speak. You will hear a message when it is your turn to speak. Once you are done speaking, you will be put back into listen-only mode. For those of you joining via Zoom, the meeting ID is 826-5476-2444, and the passcode is 236894. You are also in listen-only mode during the public comment period. If you wish to make a comment, please raise your hand in Zoom. Use the raise your hand feature in Zoom, and when you have been unmuted, you may speak. Once you're done speaking, you will be put back into listen-only mode. Okay.
All members of the TCAC board who are on the Zoom meeting, please do not comment on the regulations, proposed regulations, to avoid a possible violation of faculty king. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to start. This is going to be a two-part hearing in that we're going to have a brief overview of the proposed regulation changes. It's not going to cover all of the changes, but it will cover a significant portion of it. So we ask that you just refer to the packet and make sure you review all of the changes before you comment. And then also the slides for this that we're going to be sharing our screen will be on the website. It's in process. So please keep your eye on that. And so we'll get started with the presentation. Please hold your comments till the end. We will be taking comments following the presentation one by one and recording them for the and again, I think in the last public hearing, we want to make sure that we're getting comments that are both supportive, if you support the comment, as well as, if you oppose it, okay? All right, so we're going to move, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Everyone see the slides? Okay, so again, this is going to be a summary of the proposed regulation changes that we published on October 29th. The end of the public comment period is November 20th. So you have until 5 p.m. on that day to submit written comments. So you do not have to comment at this hearing. You can submit a letter, an email to Judith or myself, and we will get the comments. And again, November 20th is the end of the comment period. Okay, so we're going to start with state tax credits. The first state tax credits that we're going to talk about is the existing $100 million that we have that's always been available. We've always peeled out 15% of it for 4% projects. The proposed change is limiting now this 15% to acquisition and rehabilitation projects. And that's mainly because the $500 million is for new construction, and the 15% typically funds about 3 to 4 projects a year. So we wanted an avenue for acquisition and rehab projects to access state tax credits. So this is why we've are proposing to limit this to those projects. So preservation projects, and we're going to start in previous years. We've always had multiple, they've always come in with the 9% applications. We're going to go ahead and start accepting them with the first cycle of the calendar year, similar to the 500 million in state credits. And, you know, it's going to be competitive, and we're going to utilize the CIDLAC ranking system. Given that the current system that we have is more tied to the 9%, we wanted to ensure alignment with CIDLAC and make sure that the projects that are getting the state credits also get the bonds. So we're going to rely on the CIDLAC ranking system for these applications. Okay, the state tax credits, and these are the ones, the 500 million. So again, 500 million will be available for 4%. We're proposing, you know, up to 200 million again for Cal HFA MIP mixed income program funded projects. These are limited to new construction projects. And again, we're going to start with the first cycle of application reviews. So the applications applying for these state credits or the other state credits will come in the same cycles. And again, we're going to utilize the CIDLAC ranking system. If there's state credit remaining, we may establish a waiting list. We just added some language to clarify that. So, okay. All right, Gina's going to discuss the resyndication appraisals.
Morning, everyone. We have a few proposed changes related to resyndications. And just as a reminder, resyndications are applications that have or have an existing tax credit allocation and are coming in with a new application for a new award of tax credits for rehabilitation of the project. We have a few proposed changes. One is to require the current project owner to correct life and safety and physical condition violations for which they're responsible for. Those are violations that occurred before the resyndication application. So we're just asking that the owner take care of those and that the cost of those not be folded into the resyndication application. Secondly, the second 2 points, demolition of existing structures and selling a portion of vacant or unused land. We've had a number of project owners with existing TCAC restrictions approach TCAC requesting to demolish all or a portion of the site and rebuild rather than rehabilitate. We've also had project owners approach TCAC and request that a strip or a portion of vacant land be used for a different project and be subdivided and split off of the current project. So these requests have been increasing over the past few months, and what the staff is proposing is to put a standard in the regulations for these types of requests so that it's in the regulations what the requirements are, and we have a standard that we are going by. So that is what the second 2 bullets are regarding. On this slide, also we're talking about the changes related to appraisals. So there are quite a few changes related to appraisals. We're proposing to reorder the existing text to make it clearer in terms of what appraisal methodologies apply to what types of construction, whether it be new construction, adaptive reuse, or rehabilitation. We're adding parameters that when there's a rental subsidy, how that is incorporated into the appraisal methodology. Appraisers take a variety of approaches to prospective rental subsidies and incorporate that into an as-is appraisal, including considering future increases that a buyer would take into account. These approaches do have a direct impact on the acquisition value, eligible basis, and tax credits that are requested. We have provided guidance regarding these various scenarios individually to applicants, and the multiple scenarios that we are seeing are kind of increasing in complexity over the past few years. So what we're proposing is to put some guidance right in the regulations to eliminate having to answer these questions individually and make decisions after an application's been received. So we really welcome your comments from developers and comments from appraisers as well. We welcome those comments to inform our proposed changes. If you support them, if you don't support them, and if you have an alternative methodology, we would like to hear from all those perspectives. Lastly, we are proposing to allow TCAC to employ an appraisal review process. Appraisals do establish value and they have a direct impact on the top cost of the project and the amount of tax credits requested. We have seen, particularly in rehabilitation applications, appraisals with high values generating a lot of tax credits, and we're concerned with potential misuse of this. So we are proposing to allow TCAC to evaluate, contract with an appraiser and evaluate these. TCAC staff does not have appraisal licenses, and while they may have concerns with some of the appraisals and their methodologies, we are not licensed appraisers, and so we're seeking to have some guidance from them. So that is what that appraisal, or that is what that regulation section is proposing. All right, on to the next slide. Local approvals and zoning.
If I just real quick,
Yes, go ahead.
it just come to my attention that the slides are available on the website now. So if you want to follow along, I'm pointing you to the regulations page. So if you look on the far left, there's a banner that on our homepage. If you click regulations, you'll see at the top, there's a link and then a sub bullet that says public hearing presentation slides. So if you wish to open that, well, you're actually following along now, but if you wish to take notes. So anyways, sorry.
All right, so we are on the slide, local approvals and zoning. The proposed change requires evidence of local land use approvals to include explanation of the local process for land use entitlements. Local jurisdictions have unique processes, and TCAC staff has difficulty in uniformly and consistently applying the requirements of this section without understanding what an individual local jurisdiction's zoning requirements and processes are. So we are adding some specificity to the application documents. The proposed change also includes reordering existing text for better ease of understanding and readability. All right. Next slide. Every year staff does look to see if there are any application efficiencies that we can propose, and so you will see a few slides scattered throughout the presentation regarding this. This slide consolidates a few of those. For the organizational document requirement of the application, staff is seeking to simplify this and ask for just some basic documentation showing that an organization exists. We are eliminating some of the older, lengthier documents that are not necessary for us to review. Staff's also proposing to eliminate the build and fill requirement. This is a requirement that a proposed project in a rural area, if there is a project under construction, that essentially puts a hold in rural areas on other proposed projects unless a waiver is received. We put this regulation in place a few years ago. Staff has been monitoring it. Generally, we find when a waiver is requested, there's good documentation to show that there is still need in the area. In addition, California is experiencing a housing crisis. A lot of our rural areas have been devastated by wildfires, so taking this extra step at this point seems unnecessary. Staff will continue to monitor this. We do review the market studies, so we do look and see and make sure that there is enough demand in the area for a proposed project, but we are at this point proposing to eliminate this specific requirement. We are also proposing for reapplications, and this would be only the reapplication cycle immediately following an unsuccessful application, that a few application documents are able to be basically recycled or reused. The title report and the CNA and CPA certifications, those have timing requirements on them that due to application cycle programs, typically, even if you're immediately reapplying after an unsuccessful application, you have to get new or updated of these documents. We're trying to relax that requirement a little bit, and if you reapply immediately for the next cycle, you can reuse those documents. Next slide. In aligning with CIDLAC, I think what staff has seen is that the vast majority of projects apply using the joint application, and they apply simultaneously to CIDLAC and TCAC. as SIDLAC is moving into a new scoring system and continues their competitive application review, it just becomes a lot more streamlined if there is a joint application and a simultaneous application to both TCAC and SIDLAC for 4% projects. So this proposal basically requires a joint application and simultaneous application to TCAC and SIDLAC. TCAC is also proposing to align our application review period with SIDLAC's 90-day review period. And in addition, we're also proposing specific to TCAC that we may not review every 4% credit application that we receive. The projects coming in will be self-scoring, they will be ranked by SIDLAC, and TCAC will be able to view that information. And due to the limitations on staff workload and resources, we really don't have the ability to review all the applications that are coming in. We're seeing 4 and 5 times the volume that we did in previous years. And we don't really find it useful use of resources to review applications that look like they unfortunately will not be funded. So we're proposing, and we do this in the 9% competition. This has been a long-standing practice in the 9% competition, so we're proposing to adopt the same process for the 4% reviews. All right, next slide is, we've got several items going on here related to place in service. We continue to evaluate the place in service process. Unfortunately, we've had some staffing turnovers and we've had a lot of activity in 2020. We are working very diligently with the resources that we have. We're hiring new resources, so we are working to get back on track in terms of timing. And we do have some proposed changes that we hope will help with that. One of these is we are proposing that the place in service submission be provided to TCAC within 9 months of completing construction. Right now, the requirement is 12 months. And many project owners do utilize that full year to submit the application and also request extensions. Utilizing the full year, particularly when you have a place in service date, the year of the place in service, particularly when the credits are being taken for the year that the project's placing in service. Waiting a year delays TCAC's ability to start the process that has tax and financial implications for tax credit investors and affects when investors are able to receive tax forms. So many times if we have a package that arrives a year later, and maybe if you've asked for an extension a year and a month later, almost immediately upon receipt, we're getting pressed for when is it going to be done, when is it going to be done, whereas the developer has taken more than ample time in order to get it to TCAC. So we're trying to find a balance in that. We welcome your comments on that proposed change. For final cost certification, the second bullet, this doesn't impact all projects, but there are some number of projects that use their final tax credit equity installment, which occurs after the 8609s are issued, and they use that to repay or pay down existing debt. So this is actually shown in the cost certification as a prospective amount. We have established a process to manage this, and what we're proposing is just to put that in the regulations itself, that if you're putting a prospective loan pay down amount in your final cost certification, we are required to verify that. It affects how many credits you receive, and so we have a process where we ask after the 8609s are issued that you confirm that amount. So we're just putting this process that exists right now into regulations. Similar to the next bullet, the shared space and cost bullet, we have guidance on the website right now in terms of multi-phase projects, or maybe projects that are a single building, 2 projects in one building. We are putting that guidance in the regulations. There have been published memos on the website for requirements specific to these type of projects, and we are just including that in regulations just to make sure that it's clear that those are requirements. And then lastly, the last bullet, TCAC does not charge a fee for reviewing a place in service application. And unfortunately, while some of the quality has increased and gotten better place and service applications over the past year or so, we continue to see place and service applications that do have a lot of issues. So what we're proposing is if we identify a particularly problematic place and service application that has several errors, we will charge an application review fee for that. We have a new place and service manager, so we have 2 place and service managers right now, and they've been working to identify those particular items. We're very close to finalizing that process, so we will have some more specificity on that, but there will be a list of items that we're going to be reviewing right at the outset, key items that can be very disruptive to the place and service review. And if you trigger a number of those, then that's when this is going to get triggered, and we will notify you. So that's the end of that slide.
Right, so the next few slides are related to the scoring system. The first one being the general partner experience. We have proposed to change the scoring total from 6 points to 7 points for the general partner experience. And that's mainly to align with CIDLAC, who has a 7-point category for GP and then a 3-point category for management. We're also proposing to eliminate the tax credit certification experience option under the management company experience. And the main reason was, by way of reminder, this is a certification that you can get from a nationally recognized compliance entity, and that will give you 2 points out of the 3 points. These cannot be combined with the normal experience points, but we found it that this option is never selected by applicants, so we're proposing to remove that. All right, the next couple of slides have to do with site amenities and service amenities. Site amenities, we are adding some clarifying language with regard to the transit pass. We're requiring that these be provided at the time the low-income unit is being leased. And the reason we say that is because we found that there's no time frame, and we've had cases where the transit pass was not provided timely, so we're establishing a time frame for which we expect those passes to be made available. The scoring for school option, we're adding some specificity as it relates to special needs housing. We're saying that if 25% of the large family portion, so say you have a mixed special needs and large family project, you have 25% of those large family units, if they are 3-bedroom or higher, then you will be, the school option points will be made available. Okay, so the next one is the internet service. We updated the download speed, and then we also, we've been told that sometimes getting a will serve letter has been difficult, so we just want some sort of documentation that the availability of that high-speed internet is available at that project area. So, and then finally, the high and highest resource opportunity. There's a point option there. We want to clarify, and this is just literally updating, capitalizing the language and making it clear that these are specific to large family housing type projects. So this does not include special needs projects with a large family component. All right, and then service amenities, just provided a little cleanup. Some of the lower point options, we found people were not selecting. So and at the same time, those are like less hours. And so we felt we did not need to include those. We also added clarification on how to calculate the full-time equivalent. And then finally, in projects that are special needs and non-special needs, we added some clarifying language on what is expected. If a project has less than 75% special needs, you have to pick from the options under 1 through 6 and from 7 through 12. And the language, CIDLAC's proposed regulation changes are pointing to the TCAC services. So we kind of looked at CIDLAC's and we kind of wanted those to be aligned. So that's where some of these changes also were derived. All right, sustainable building methods. As you know, CIDLAC, the framework, the committee proposed to remove that point option. And it was mainly for, projects because we were told that, given the emphasis on housing units, we wanted to, and cost containment, unit production, and the high standard that the building code already requires, we are proposing to remove that point category in alignment with SIDLAC. We welcome your comments. And then, yeah, so that's the sustainable building methods. And then readiness to proceed. We've kind of consolidated, we took out the portion regarding local approvals, and we found that it was kind of duplicative in a way with the local approvals and zoning requirements. So we kind of are capturing that in that area, which Gina already explained. So this category will remain a 10-point category, but it's going to be specific to commitment of all construction financing. So you have to have all your construction financing committed at the time of application, and your commitment to close construction financing within 180 and 194 days. So we just modified that. It's still a 10-point category. It's just the approval requirement is now going to be tied to the local approvals and zoning application requirement. Okay, and then the first, we're going to jump into the tiebreaker. Well, the first tiebreaker is the housing type goal tiebreaker. We had a case in the last committee meeting where one of the projects was a special needs project, and it scored the highest in their region. It was a very high final tiebreaker score. And we skipped it because we had already met the housing type goal of special needs. And we didn't think that was necessarily good public policy. So what we're proposing is that we will still employ the skipping based on the housing type goals. So once we meet a goal, we will skip a project. However, we will not skip the highest ranked project in a specific set aside or geographic region. So if you are the highest project, we will not skip you for the housing type goal if it's been met.
Of the final tiebreaker scoring proposed changes. There's quite a bit on this slide, so I will go through each bullet. The first sub-bullet, excluding outstanding principal balances for existing TCAC projects. In addition, public loans funded less than 30 years prior to the application date would not count as public funds for scoring purposes, and is proposed as part of alignment with the proposed scoring system. Next, clarifying ineligible offsite costs. The proposed change includes a clarification of TCAC's current process for ineligible offsite calculations. This has been in place since the addition of the offsite language in the tiebreaker. It's in just about every point letter when you get an offsite reduction. It's been in published guidance. We've gone over it at every application workshop, but we would like to further clarify it in the regulations. Next, committed rental subsidies. The value of rental subsidies in the tiebreaker is tied to the contract rent amount for each unit type. Staff has provided guidance regarding various scenarios, and we've had an increase over the years. That's increased, and so we have quite a bit of scenarios that we've provided guidance to. We've also evaluated applications, done some tiebreaker redemptions. In addition, some decisions have been made on appeal. In proposing these changes, we want to put specific parameters and rules in the regulations so that these decisions that are made individually are in the regulations, and people are aware of how, more clearly aware of how rental subsidies are evaluated in the tiebreaker. What I would suggest, if you're interested in commenting on these, we have proposed changes related to appraisal of rental subsidies in the tiebreaker and also in the TCAC underwriting. So there's 3 places where we're seeking to clarify how rental subsidies and contract rents are evaluated by TCAC for those 3 purposes: appraisals, tiebreaker, and underwriting. So if you're interested in these, I would really suggest that you look at all those changes, and if you have comments, kind of give us some comments that take into account all of those, because the purpose, although rental subsidies and contract rents are not proposed to be treated exactly the same way in all these sections, these are staff's proposed changes, and we welcome hearing from you on what your thoughts are on the direction that we are taking. And it is based primarily on what we've been doing. Okay. Next bullet, remove soft loan minimum term. the reduction from a standard of 55 years for non-public soft loans is to the standard equal to the term of 55 years that is for the other, that is for every other soft financing course. And it's proposed to make this option more attractive to prospective lenders. And lastly, we are adding recycled private activity bonds as a public funding source as part of the alignment with the proposed SIDLAC scoring system. If you're familiar with TCAC's final tiebreaker, there are two ratios. We've been talking primarily about the first ratio in the last slide. There is a second ratio that gets to cost or credit efficiency. What we're proposing to do is eliminate the 1/3 discount for this second ratio that essentially dilutes that second ratio when the two are combined. And then we are clarifying that for tiebreaker percentage point increases specific to large family, these are for large family housing type projects, not for large family units within another housing type project. That's clarification.
All right, so the next couple of slides are related to the minimum construction standards. The first one being energy efficiency. As I stated with the sustainable building methods category, these projects are required to meet a very high standard building code requirement. So we are proposing to remove the language at the beginning of the energy efficiency section relating to meeting with the design team. Just again, cost containment and to emphasize unit production. That's the main reason behind that. And then finally, we are requiring that the sustainable building methods workbook be provided at the placed in service stage rather than placed in service application. And then we also removed some references to SIDLAC's scoring criteria given the sustainable building methods point category at SIDLAC is also being proposed to be removed. We are clarifying appliances, and we're clarifying that cooktop and oven are required for SRO or non-SRO low-income units. And then for SRO units, we will require at least a cooktop or microwave. And I think the existing language just said stove, so we wanted to provide some clarification on what we expect to see. Okay, the next section is the manager's unit. We have cases sometimes where the manager unit is occupied by a low-income tenant. We provided some clarification on that. The unit will be treated as a low-income unit, and it will be included in the applicable fraction. And if it is occupied by a low-income tenant and the on-site manager is terminated, they cannot be evicted from that unit. And then the last section in the minimum construction standards has to do with accessibility. A few years ago, we added some accessibility requirements specific to Chapter 11B. We are proposing similarly with the energy efficiency, we want to emphasize the affordable, unit production of housing. And we were informed, there's cases where sometimes these units are not being utilized fully. And the current regulations goes beyond what building code requirements. So all we're doing is proposing to go back to what the building code requires. So that's the main thing there. And then housing type requirements. I think Gina is.
Yes, for all housing type requirements, there is a washer and dryer. What we're proposing is that washer and dryer requirements be reduced if there are hookups in units to avoid or to eliminate duplication. What we've heard is that a full laundry room is not necessary when many of the units are taking advantage of the hookups that are within the units themselves. For a large family, we're proposing for the dishwashers to exempt studio or efficiency and SRO units from required dishwashers. And for 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom rehabilitation projects, a waiver can be granted at the discretion of the executive director. For senior projects, currently the age requirement is that every household in the unit be at least age 62 or above. What we found is that there's been uneven enforcement of this requirement, and that it appears there's developer assumptions about when a federal funding source provides an exception to this requirement. So I think we've seen it difficult to evenly enforce, and also in light of the fact that there's a housing crisis and we would like to provide housing, make housing more available to people of California of all ages. So we're proposing just to use the California Code definitions for senior in aligning TCAC senior age requirement. Regarding the reduced accessibility percentages, the proposed change proposes to reduce the number of required accessible units from 50% to 20% of the units on an accessible path for new construction, and from 25% to 10% for rehabilitation. With staff's understanding that the current percentages exceed demand for such features and make the units less marketable to lease. Additionally, for new construction, California Building Code requires units be built with adaptable features that allow units to be converted to accessible units. So as an alternate to the current requirement, staff is proposing to ensure that tenants are aware that when the need for accessible features arise, they have the ability to request their adaptable unit be converted to an accessible unit. All right, the next slide for special needs housing type. There are some document requirements that are rather vague and difficult for TCAC to enforce. We've got requirements for a summary of developer experience, but there's no threshold for that developer experience. We also have require a contract plus a resolution. We're seeking to eliminate the need for the resolution and just require a contract or an MOU between the developer and the service provider. We are also clarifying that when a project doesn't have an operating subsidy, and again, we're still on special needs housing type, we're proposing to provide some clarity for how an applicant demonstrates the targeted population can afford to pay the rent. So we do see applications for special needs projects that have 50 and 60% AMI units and no rail subsidy. At this point, we really rely solely on the market study to make that determination, and there are times when we have done a reduction because we don't feel the market study supports the fact that those tenants would not be rent overburdened with those AMI targeting. So our proposed change seeks to provide some parameters with which staff can make these determinations. So we welcome your comments on that proposed change. For at-risk housing needs type, this change really is seeking to clarify existing language and also add in language that's part of statute but isn't specifically mentioned to TCAC. So projects with loans or grants administered by HCD, if those are expiring, the project's at risk. That is in state statute, but for some reason it wasn't mentioned in TCAC regs, so we put that in. There are also projects that their current restrictions are solely a SIDLAC bond regulatory agreement, so we're proposing to add that to the list of at-risk items. And then we have a couple of instances recently where the current language, the project is at risk of losing affordability due to market or other conditions. That's been challenging for staff to interpret and apply, and so we're adding some specificity of that restrictions result in an increase in actual tenant rent of more than 10%. So we expect to receive some comments on this as this has come out a few times recently. That's it.
All right, the next few slides are related to proposed changes in the developer fee. We felt like it just needed, the language itself needed some simplification. So we felt like we hopefully provided that, and we welcome your comments. We've also proposed to remove the high cost factor that we incorporated a few years back. It was in an effort to, encourage projects to, incentivize projects that were saving costs. But, based on what we've seen, we haven't seen much effect on that. And it does create kind of a calculation. It does make the calculation a little bit more complex. So we didn't think the trade-off was sufficient. So we're proposing to remove that. In addition, we are proposing to increase the hard cost requirement for the cash out fee from $10,000 to $20,000. So actually, you know what? I think that's a typo. Sorry. Not the hard cost. This is the cash out fee where if you are proposing a project that's in excess of 100 units, for every unit over 100, you get to add 10,000 to that total. And we're proposing to change it from 10,000 to 20. So I apologize for that error on that bullet. So that's essentially increasing the cash out fee and further incentivizing this for developer fee. And then we're saying, we're clarifying the 4% projects that where you have an increase in basis and you can request a higher developer fee. We're requiring that the entire increase be deferred or contributed back to the project as equity. Okay. So projects that acquisition and rehab projects, they are, they've always been eligible for a 15% increase to their acquisition basis. And previously they can get it in 3 ways. They can be at risk. They can have deeper targeting on their units. And then also they can meet a construction hard cost requirement, which previously was $25,000. We are proposing to raise that to $50,000. And I think most projects that get the 15% on acquisition basis typically get it through this avenue of hard cost per unit. So we're just proposing to increase that, make sure that these projects are doing significant work to the project. And then also we are excluding re-syndication projects from accessing the 15% on acquisition basis. Typically we see related party transfers and based on, what we see, we feel like the 5% on the acquisition basis is comparable and sufficient, for related party transfer. So we welcome your comments on these items. We also added one clarifying thing on the simultaneous phasing. Previously, we said the construction start dates or completion dates are to be within 6 months. We've increased that to 12 months. So it's widening what we would consider simultaneous phasing of 2 projects. Okay, we added a new clause that relates to deferred developer fee. We are going to require that those notes and or agreements be provided in the place and service package. And we're clarifying that the interest shall not exceed 8%. And this is based on what we've seen. I think we've seen it as high as 10, but I think in the normal, what we see is around 8. So we're establishing that as a cap, for those notes for deferred developer fee. And then also persons of color, women-owned business enterprise projects. CIDLAC is proposing to add a experience that incorporates these type of projects, and it requires a split of the developer fee and other things. And so to ensure, to make sure that to compensate for that, we're proposing that if you are, you get points for that option, you can utilize a 20% instead of 15% multiplier to determine the developer fee on the basis. So if you get points on CIDLAC for that, then you get to utilize 20%. Okay, threshold basis limits, again, a couple of these are to further align with SIDLAC. We're proposing to increase the podium parking, parking under units from 7% to 10%. And, my research has shown that we have not increased that 7% since implementation back, I think, in the early 2000s. So we're proposing to increase that to 10% to offset the cost associated with providing podium parking. And then also we're proposing to provide an increase for type 1 construction, and that will be 15%. And then for type 3 or more, or you could have a portion that's a combination of type 3 and type 1, which would get you 10% boost on construction, and therefore that again should account for the additional costs associated with those type of constructions. And then Gina's gonna do the last slide, and then.
Yes, the last slide is a mix of some miscellaneous unrelated changes. The first, related party fee and loan limits. The proposed change limits additional fees that related parties may collect in addition to developer fees. In looking at cost containment, and also with based on information that we have from many of our price and service application reviews, we found instances of fees charged by related parties in addition to the developer fee, and we're looking to limit this. The developer fee is meant to be the compensation for development, and what we've seen is in some instances parties seem to be looking for ways to increase that amount in terms of services and fees that are provided. So welcome your comments on this proposed change. Second bullet, scattered site applications and resyndication applications. Just as a reminder, TCAC's application fee is $1,000. SIDLAC's application fee is $1,200. I don't know the last time TCAC's application fee has been updated, but I would say that scattered site applications and resyndication applications take a considerable amount of considerable more time than other applications to review, and so we are proposing to require a $1,500 application fee for those types of applications. And lastly, the final proposed change is the clarification. When an existing project seeks to switch out a property management company and go with a different company, we just want to ensure that that incoming property management company has a minimum level of experience. I think that is understood, but if you read the regulations and it's not actually written in there, there's current guidance about equivalent experiences for general partners, but
Okay, so I'm gonna just.
Sorry, I just want to
Sure.
make a comment, which is that I want everyone, before you start giving us your questions, to acknowledge, even though I can't hear it, the hard work that Anthony and Gina have done on all of this work. They've worked very, very hard, and I just want to mention that before we go into the comments. Thank you very much, Anthony.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, Gina.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop the share screen. I saw a number of hands raised. I think maybe I'm trying to think if we should take questions first, because what we want to do is we typically take comments, but I'm open to questions. Unfortunately, I'm not sure what the hand raise, if it's a question or if it is a comment. So I'm actually just gonna probably just take it, and you guys can include your questions in the comment. So I'm gonna start with the top one. As I unmute you, these will be recorded, and we will publish a table similar to what we've done in the past, summarizing the comments. Okay, and again, you are not required to comment at this hearing. We do accept written comments if that's easier for you. You might have more thoughts as we near the November 20th deadline. So if you wish to wait, that is fine too. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up, and I will start with the top of the list. And as I select you, I will lower your hand. So we're going to start with Betsy Morris.
You're there. Can you hear me? I am unmuted.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to comment on the proposed changes. I am convener of the Berkeley East Bay Gray Panthers. We are working with colleagues in other chapters around the state, and I'm calling to express dismay and outrage and wonderment at proposals to lower the number of required units for older adults and people with disabilities in California. All of the evidence that I have seen is that these numbers are growing of people who need affordable and accessible units. And the idea that we would use our tax credits, very important program, to actually fly against the demographic and economic knowledge we have about who is rent burdened, who's most likely at risk of being homeless. It's just mind boggling. We haven't had a time to go through all the many other changes, but I am asking that that the tax credit committee reject the proposed changes to sections 10325 F7K and 10325 G2B. I think if I heard right, this move will not necessarily cut any costs for developers, and certainly not for the public in the long term, because of the outcomes of people living in unsafe or inaccessible or simply no home at all. We really have to prepare for the future and go in line with the proposed California Master Plan on Aging, which Gray Panthers is supporting in some of its respects. So there's just an incredible need to match up these tax credit programs with the actual need for accessible units, so that people with disabilities, whether temporarily or permanently, can be part of the economy in safe, stable housing. And for our seniors, which is the fastest growing demographic in the state, and poverty among seniors is growing, it is all the more important that every unit be designed so that anyone can age in place safely. So I thank you for the time to speak. We'd like more opportunities. I know myself, I've known 4 people this year alone in wheelchairs living on the streets who've died. So I know personally here in Berkeley, we're working hard to create more affordable units. Please do not undercut the ability of our affordable housing developers to do their work and create what we need to have safe, strong communities around the state. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, the next comment, Carol, I'm gonna unmute you. Carol?
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to speak to the same topic. The senior housing and special needs housing needs to be increased, if anything, not reduced. And if it's solely for aligning projects, it's not going to meet the needs that we have. Of the people that are going without housing, they tend to be 50 years old and up. And many of the people that are having trouble finding housing have special needs. If anything, it should be increased. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Art Persico?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my name's Art Persico. I'm convener of the San Francisco Gray Panthers. I'm also with the California Gray Panthers. And I support my allies in the disability community who have objected to your new rules. Point 1, you should reject the changes to section 10325 F7K and 10325 G2B. Secondly, There were only 7 business days to review 64 pages of proposed changes and prepare for this hearing. That's not enough time to address the drastic changes to accessible housing. Thirdly, the cost to make units accessible after they've been built is much higher than the cost to make units accessible in new construction. TCAC claims these proposals will save money for developers, but it will cost more in the long run to make accessible changes to housing. TCAC has no data to support its claim. Fourthly, over 4 million Californians have disabilities and need accessible housing. 17.9% of households that qualify for affordable TCAC housing include someone with a mobility disability, and 12.8% include someone with a hearing or visual disability. The new rule would not even meet 1/3 of the need. People who are homeless and have disabilities also have a huge need. Finally, I know as a San Francisco Gray Panther and a California Gray Panther, we have members who would be directly and adversely impacted by the inadequacies of the new rule, which would impose on the availability of accessible housing in California, tough restrictions. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you. Okay, Aaron Carruthers.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Aaron Carruthers. I'm the Executive Director of the California State Council on Developmental Disabilities. I'm joining you today to ask you to please reject the proposed changes to sections 10352F7K and 10352G2B. The current TCAC regulations require developers who receive tax credits from the program to build 10% of the housing units with features accessible to people with mobility disabilities and 4% of the housing with features accessible to people with hearing and vision disabilities. And my understanding is that the proposal before you today would cut these requirements in half. This is contrary to the need in the community, and I trust many of the speakers today are going to tell you about that need. I want to give you a different perspective. I believe this proposal is also contrary to the governor and the legislature's clear and specific movement toward community living. So a little history and context is that 140 years ago, California, the best, most well-intentioned people in California thought the best thing you can do for people with developmental disabilities is to put them into institutions. So somebody with Down syndrome or cerebral palsy or an intellectual disability was born, and the medical community would say, okay, well, there's nothing you can do for them, but we've got a place over here where they can live out their life away from you and unburden you. These institutions, these developmental centers sprung up in Sonoma's, California's oldest, Fairview, Los Angeles, the Bay Area, Agnews, and over time we've learned there's a better way. That better way is living in the community, and these developmental centers have closed, are in the process of closing, and the most recent one just closed at the end of last year. So it's a legacy, but it's a legacy that continues. Surprisingly, shockingly, families are still told by medical professionals who have children born of developmental disabilities they shouldn't expect much, but that's not the reality. And having integrated community housing is what is needed. So I believe that this goes against the legislature and the governor's views to close down developmental institutional settings, make as many available options in the community as possible. And this proposal before you is what we've seen as the biggest cut to affordable, accessible housing we've seen in decades, and ask you to please reject it. Thank you.
All right, Bill Hecker.
Hi, my name is Bill Hecker, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm an architect and accessibility consultant out of Birmingham, Alabama. I practice nationwide, and of particular interest in the context of today's proposed regulatory changes to the scope of the accessible low-income housing units before you is that I was the architectural expert for the plaintiffs in the nation's largest accessibility lawsuit related to public housing. This was in a case called the Independent Living Center of Southern California et al. Versus the City of Los Angeles. This lawsuit led to a settlement between the parties that'll result in construction or remediation of 4,000 accessible low-income housing units. It was clear to me as I analyzed the design and construction of hundreds of public housing projects that there was a near complete failure to provide units with mobility features and communication features required by the California Building Code, CBC 11B, and the federal regulations as well. I'm here today to ask that you not reduce the scope of the accessible units in section 10325F7K and 10325G2B for senior projects. I'd also like to ask your consideration in the notice provision for 10325G2B that you address what I believe is a failure to deal with both 11B and 11A adaptable features. The notice, in my opinion, should read all project owners must effectively communicate adequate notice to tenants of their ability to request conversion of adaptable features in their CBC 11A and CBC 11B dwelling units, end quote. In conclusion, TCAC has been a leader in addressing the accessibility gap that I recognized, but the proposed changes are a real setback. People with disabilities need affordable housing that is accessible. Without this, they can't live independently and are stuck in institutions. California's housing stock already falls far short, I believe, of its accessible housing and affordable housing needs. Many individuals with disabilities are homeless because of a lack of accessible housing. TCAC's proposed cuts would devastate Californians with disabilities and should be considered, or you should consider not reducing those accessibility unit levels. Thank you very much for your time and your hard work on all the changes that you made so far. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Bill Paveo.
Okay, am I unmuted?
You're
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity. Just by way of introduction, I'm a member of the Sacramento Housing Alliance and I chair their Development Advisory Committee. But I'm speaking to you today as the former executive director at TCAC, who was there when the current competitive standards regarding accessibility were enacted. So my comments, like the previous speakers, regard those sections 10325F7K and 10325G2B. And just by way of reminder, those requirements, those standards apply to the 9% competitive system. As they relate to new construction, TCAC's accessibility features enacted during that tenure of then Treasurer Bill Lockyer were viewed as progressive changes that would deliver additional public purpose value with minimal additional cost. And what we learned from organizations working with persons with disabilities is that finding fully accessible units in the open rental marketplace is virtually impossible. And for households with low incomes, the pool of such units is vanishingly small, especially in light of the fact that most of what's coming on market these days is high-end luxury rentals. So in that context, the competitive accessibility features beyond the state building code minimums were in the context of TCAC delivering through its administration of the federal low-income housing tax credits and state credits. Through this oversubscribed competitive system, these additional standards would really reap a tremendous public benefit for very little additional cost, especially in new construction when the design goes in at the very inception of the project. Again, when designed initially, the additional cost of unit accessibility when on an accessible route to the unit is minimal. The benefit is that more units 10% of the units on accessible routes and 50% in senior housing type units accommodate persons with mobility challenges. In the case of seniors, if state policy is to accommodate aging in place, which it is, then an abundance of accessible units is within reach, within each new development is essential. Fully accessible units allow visitability as well. I think a prior commenter mentioned that asset as well, especially where continued social interaction is really critical in senior deals. Finally, the current competitive feature of 4% of the units containing communications features for persons with visual or hearing challenges also delivers significant public benefit for minimal, if any, additional cost. I would also advocate retaining the current rehabilitation standards. My remarks have been about these standards as they apply to new construction deals, but I think rehab, those standards should stay in place as well. And TCAC should disclose what your experience has been with waiver requests, and in what cases have those waivers been sought, in what cases have they been granted. I think that's subject to additional conversation around applying these standards to rehabilitation. But in the meantime, I think the current higher standards for these competitive credits ought to stay in place. Finally, if there is some argument out there that, hey, we've got these accessible units and there's just not enough demand for those units, we urged when we adopted these standards that developers work closely with disability rights advocates and service providers because we were convinced, and I remain convinced, that there is more than abundant demand for these fully accessible units. So in conclusion, I would advise against changing those standards back down to the minimum code required standards and retaining these higher standards. So thanks.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Zach Carnazes.
Hi, thank you. My name is Zach Carnazes. I'd like to really thank the previous comment from William Poveo. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. And the Great Panthers and the people here, they're speaking up for me and folks with disabilities. I'd like to first point out that I requested a disability accommodation to speak at the beginning of this meeting. That was clearly denied. Also, that the TCAC person here present is not showing their name. They're, in fact, the only person I can see on the call that is not showing their name. And they've also blocked the Q&A and the chat, so I could not communicate with the ADA coordinator. Instead, the disabled were forced to sit through an hour of confusing, tedious PowerPoint presentations that were very complex and difficult to understand. It has been the job of Disability Rights California to inform us of what is happening here today, because this department has worked overtime to obscure what is happening. My name is Zach Carnazes. I'm a journalist, a disability advocate, and a community organizer based in San Francisco. As you can see, I use a wheelchair, and I have been trying very hard for affordable housing because I live in a rent-controlled unit, which means a unit built on or before 1979, which means it does not have to have accessibility as defined under the ADA. In San Francisco, according to our point-in-time count, the official statistics, 2,169 people as of last year were homeless with disabilities. We are in the middle of a giant health pandemic and a fire raging across this state that has made people lose, thousands of people lose their homes, and PG&E cutting off electricity for those of us with disabilities. During the course of this pandemic and a highly confusing election, this department saw fit to try to push through 64 pages of changes in 7 days to some of the most important codes for our public housing. This is draconian. This is clearly wrong, and this is clearly intentionally an attack on the disabled community. If you are disabled in California and you live on Social Security income because you are disabled and you cannot work, the maximum income you can receive a month, according to the SSA website, is $943.72 a month. $943.72 a month. I would like to ask the member from TCAC here, how do you plan to live on $943.72 a month and get housing in California? During the presentations here, I see that there's plans to cut the stove out of SROs so people cannot cook. There are plans to cut the washer and dryer hookups for people so disabled people in SROs cannot wash our clothes. Do you realize how sinister and cruel this is to people during a pandemic, during wildfires, during an economic crisis that is happening in this state? It baffles the mind. And to propose these changes in a 7-day period, very complex and confusing changes. I'd also like to point out that according to the Eviction Defense Collaborative here in San Francisco, that 51% of evictions that take place are people with disabilities. We are completely disproportionately targeted by these issues, by the issue of housing. I myself have to crawl on the floor to get out of my apartment because of stairs, and I don't have the funds to pay for all the structural changes that are needed, and there's no laws that require the building owner to provide them. I need affordable housing. I need accessible affordable housing. And by the TCAC proposing these measures to cut funding for that, it affects me directly. And so maybe my comments are a little more emotional right now, because this is an emotional and a personal issue for me and people I know in my community. It is absolutely implausible that this would even be proposed in a time like this, let alone at any time. And the cruelty to our community is just unspeakable. There are over 4 million disabled Californians that this will affect. And as pointed out previously, this will not save money. This will not save money. I repeat, developers, this will not save money. It will cost more money to make these changes later, because these units, if they're built after the ADA was passed, are required to be accessible. And what you will get is people filing lawsuits. We don't want to file lawsuits. We hate filing lawsuits. They're taxing and
Everything's frozen.
I understand that TCAC is trying to save money. I understand we are in a time of economic hardship. This is not the way to go about it. I heard earlier in the call today about making cuts to planning and the way meeting with developers and meeting with people that build these units. I mean, these are not the ways to save money. These are ways to really mess up the economy, really mess up the housing market, and really destroy the lives of people that are already suffering some of the worst right now in this state. As pointed out previously, we want to live in the community. We have fought for many decades to live in the community among our fellow Americans and our fellow Californians. Please don't take that away from us. Please don't force us into nursing homes or on the streets during this really horrible, horrible time. Lastly, I want to thank again the Gray Panthers and William Paveo for their support and Disability Rights California. And I'm happy to coordinate with any of you if you want to write an article about this or interview me about my experience. And let's really get this in the public eye, because 7 days is not enough and we have to spread the word. And I know they're having more time for written comment, but we've only had a few days just to find out when this meeting was. And written comment, I'm sorry, is not the same as leaving a live public comment when you can see me in my wheelchair speaking to you directly. It's a totally different thing. It's a totally different experience, and it's taken differently. And I ask that you have another meeting in person or through Zoom like this, where the QA is open, where reasonable disability accommodations are either denied or accepted without these weird games that were played this time, where we can communicate with ADA coordinators and ask for accessibility accommodations during the meeting if we need them, and communicate with your staff, and that your staff is present and displaying their names so that we can address people on this board and that we know who we're addressing, instead of this very strange circumstance that we have here today. My name is Zach Karnazes. Again, I'm a journalist, disability advocate based in San Francisco, and anyone can reach me at zkarnazes@gmail.com, KARNAZES@gmail.com. I also publish on YouTube and with the San Francisco Coalition on Homelessness. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Zach, for your comment. Okay, the next comment is Sheila Gunn Cushman.
Zoom. Here I am. Button. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm Sheila Gunn Cushman. I live in Oakland. I have multiple disabilities. I'm totally blind. Your I'm sure very slick presentations did me no good. They also did no good for folks on the phone who didn't have access to the chat in wherein you put your website, I presume, where they could go look at the documents. I needed a glossary to understand what the Daiichi double hockey sticks you were talking about. But I echo all of what has been said here. I would like to add a couple more things. I wish I didn't have to. First, I live in a duplex, both of which units are Section 8 tenants. My landlord only has 16 units of renters entirely, 9 of which are Section 8s. I too am on SSDI and SSI, but I am totally blind, and so I get $1,020 a month as opposed to Zach's 943. However, I am extremely low income as opposed to very low or low income as regards HUD guidelines. I am a person who needs accessibility in the application process, which is sorely lacking. When I did my, excuse me, when I did my last housing hunt in 2014-15, most of the applications I dealt with were ink and paper, 18th century technology. We are now in the 21st century. I demand that you add to your regulations a mandate that Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act are followed, because what you need is the information, not the information in print. And also, I need you to...
All right, well, thank you guys for tuning in and joining me for the last couple hours. We're going to be moving on to our next presenter. We have Dave Scott here, and we've also got Dean. How you guys doing?
Is that...
just happened.
Oh, this is having our lunch.
No, get off. I'm talking about what just happened in this meeting.
Oh, that's not from, I don't believe that's
okay.
Not here.
I'm sorry. We need to have these applications made accessible, and we need the application process available, and we need to make sure that the accessibility rules stay in place and in fact are added to. These tax credit properties do me no good. Most of them are 60% to 80% of area median income, and I am only 30% if I'm lucky of area median income. So I don't know. The only thing I can think of for lowering the threshold of accessibility is greed, and I won't tolerate it. And I will be right with anyone who has to sue to get our rights. My current unit is not fully accessible, and if I need to age in place, I won't be able to. I cannot do stairs, and I have one step to get in my house, but I can manage that. But if I get any more disabilities or mine get worse, I won't have them. One more thing. Sustainability. All of my appliances here are gas, and I have asthma, and gas is a very unsustainable environmental thing, and it is also a thing which impacts people's health in a bad way, and we cannot afford it. I would like to offer my landlord some sort of credit in order to
raised hand.
In order to get an upgrade to electric everything. And we need this stuff to work in order for us to function in our communities, as has been stated. And I'm sorry for the interruptions here, but thank you for at least letting us speak. But I must say that 45 minutes of your 60, I did not understand. I heard the words, but they were way over the heads of those who need to care about this stuff. And I felt like it was a way of trying to confuse the enemy. And If you want me to be your enemy, I will, but I would rather be your friend. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment, Shelley. Okay, Michael Lyon.
Links. No previous link. Portrait. Controls. Default. Current. Sheila. Audios. Zoom. Leave. Recording. Mute my audio.
Yeah, the California Gray Panthers, with members in Berkeley, San Francisco, Long Beach, and Santa Barbara, are outraged at the California TCAC's plan to let profit-hungry developers build and sell affordable housing developments with half the number of disability and senior accessible units. Developers must be licking their chops. You claim to promote affordable housing, but you're choosing to drastically reduce creation of housing for the very groups most needing affordable housing. Your actions will have a huge influence on affordable housing construction in California. You are arguably the biggest of 12 state housing providers in California, and you've been involved in financing construction of some 21,000 units across the state yearly. The most COVID vulnerable homeless people in San Francisco, seniors and people with disabilities, are being kicked out of their hotels and back out onto the streets. And you're choosing this time to cut back on affordable housing for these people. A huge rash of evictions is expected in the spring as various emergency programs expire, largely affecting cash poor seniors and people with disabilities. And you're choosing this time to cut back on affordable housing for these people. You may think you can rush through this without anybody noticing, but this will not happen. And we assure you, don't dare do this. That's all.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Lyon. All right, Murtaza Baksamusa.
Good morning. I appreciate the comments that came before me. I am going to talk about a slightly different topic about property management. My name is Murtaza Baksamusa, and I'm with the San Diego Building Trades Family Housing Corporation. We own and manage 454 units on 22 acres in San Diego region that were built in the 1960s using a HUD Section 221D3 loan. We're now looking at continuing our affordable housing mission, both redevelopment and rehabilitation using tax credits. We're appreciative of the regulation changes that will allow us to rehabilitate the apartments in the interim as we go through a phased redevelopment approach, since this will permit a tax credit rehab of the remainder of the site without being concerned that it would get in the way of future redevelopment at a higher density. However, we're concerned about the limitation of the property management experience to tax credit projects. The regulation makes it harder for us to continue to manage our own property under tax credit regulations, even with certified training of our staff. There are many current owner-managers of HUD-assisted or previously HUD-assisted properties that have significant experience with HUD regulations. If they don't have current LIHTC property management experience, they will be discouraged from refinancing, rehabilitating, or redeveloping their properties, even though they have extensive experience with managing income-restricted rental housing, including tenant qualification and income certification. Our staff, which is all union, have good quality wages and benefits, know the local community, they reside in it, and have long tenures working on our property. The way the regulations are written, we would be forced to outsource the management of our own property to a non-union management company permanently. This creates a significant barrier for us to use tax credits in improving our property and redevelop to a greater density to offer more affordable housing. Therefore, I encourage you to revisit these regulations, given that private participants in these transactions, especially the investor, have a key vested interest in making sure the managers have the capacity so that their investor isn't subject to recapture. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Helen Walsh.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I on? Okay. I'm here rejecting 10325 F7K and 10325 G2B, along with my colleagues, the Gray Panthers, California Gray Panther, the East Gray Panthers, all of us here today. Also, along with disability rights advocate Zach, Disability Rights California. I can name many people on this call. I think I also saw Sophia DeWitt of EBHO. And what I want to state here, this is just ridiculous. Oh, and Sheila Gunn Cushman. This is ridiculous that this is happening. Sorry, phone's in the background. You'll have to be all right with that because I can't turn it off. I have MS. I have a visual impairment. I was only given 7 days to read 64 pages of material, of which I read with my screen reader. The notice on the official website does not have a date. We're only allowed 5 days up to the meeting happening to request accommodations. And as Zach had just put out, it really is not welcoming or inclusive to the diverse population of persons with disabilities, nor senior citizens new to using adaptive devices or learning, especially in this digital divide. Just want to state strongly there. The costs that you're talking about of taking this out, it's not going to reduce costs to developers. It's going to create more costs for developers. This is known even in the technology industry. That if you don't start with accessibility in mind, it ends up costing more. And as stated, properties that are prior to this time that can't be made accessible, that actually is where you will find that information, both historical reasons, but thus the cost to also make them accessible. We have many people unhoused that are out on the streets. In San Francisco, there's been documentation. Majority of those people are seniors and persons with disabilities because of health costs. That has been a road to being unhoused. So we don't have enough housing even now available that is accessible. Often people don't rent out the accessible units. That's where you're getting your data wrong. And if I'm going to point to data, we are not taking proper data in order to include persons with disabilities and seniors, and also the negative impacts that are what is going on. And I can go on and on. Mostly I'm outraged today, but I'm so grateful for everybody on this call speaking up with such short notice to actually those rejecting 10325F7K and 10325G2B. Hopefully I got the numbers right. I'm visually impaired doing all this with a plug in my ear, trying to read my notes at the same time, so I can juggle. So I wanted to thank everybody speaking here today rejecting this. And again, I'm just going to keep saying it. I reject, I reject, I reject. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, the next comment is Mackay Freeman.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for having this hearing. And I want to again support and express my deep opposition and anger to this change. First, I don't understand how you could have major changes affecting housing for disability, schedule a public hearing, and have a notice on how field disabilities can make accommodations. I always find that very telling. And what it tells me is that the people who supposedly make changes don't really know a lot about disability, disabled people, and our lives. I am a Black woman with a neuromuscular disease. This occurred later in my life. Many of community of color live in multi-generational households. Many people in this economic era struggle with finding meeting housing costs in California and Bay Area. If you have a senior grandmother or you're a single mother raising a disabled child and you're working 2 or 3 jobs, try and maintain your ability to live with dignity in the state, knowing how hard it is to find accessible housing, and for the TCAC to think reducing tax credit to build housing for disabled senior members. It's kind of like, it's such a disconnect. It's almost leaves me speechless. So I'd like to ask, what kind of market research, who did you contact to ask about changes? And another thing is, I'm going to take extra time. I'm on a ventilator. I've asked for additional accommodation because speaking is sometimes very difficult. Disabled people are not damaged people. We are people who live in our bodies, living our lives unapologetically. We are fought for the ability to live independently in the community. And also, we are the largest minority that has equal opportunity. That means many on this, the TAC, will benefit from the fighting and the fighting for our rights. You will benefit. And you have to think of in the lifespan, stroke, catastrophic injury. If you don't have a house that that is accessible, and you want to come back home and or rent an apartment so you can live in it, think about what you're implementing here. Think about how it could affect you. So I'm not going to go into the regulations. Again, you didn't even have consideration to break it down everyday language so people can understand. But we understand this is an attack to our independence, to our dignity, and to our ability to live in the community. And we ask you not to do these changes. Go back to the table, involve independent living activists, property management, and really get a well-informed package that you can be proud of, and the community can have better options. I asked everyone, I'm forming a group called Black and Brown Disabled Lives Matter. My name is Makai Freeman, And you can email me at blackandbrown@gmail.com. We must amplify our voices and not be afraid to really talk and defend our rights, because no one else is going to. This is an example of tax dollars again being used to dehumanize us, to marginalize us, to render our voices invisible. And we don't have it. Our lives depend on us standing up, being visible, being articulate, and speaking truth to power. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Freeman. Okay, the next comment is Dara Shur.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee and the staff. I am a senior counsel with Disability Rights California. Disability Rights California is the state's largest disability rights organization, and California and federally designated state protection and advocacy agency that works on behalf of people with a broad range of disabilities throughout California. And I'm here on behalf of generally people with mobility and communication disabilities to ask you to reject the cuts to accessibility in sections 10325 F7K and 10325 G2. I think what you are hearing today is evidence of the enormous need and concern out there from people with disabilities who need accessible units to live independently. And we've heard from a broad range of folks with a variety of needs, but there's no question that given the short notice of this hearing and that provided difficulty even for us to fully prepare, I think the fact that you're going to hear from so many people who are concerned about the cut in accessibility access reflects the enormous need. I'm going to focus on a few highlights today, and we will be sending in much more detailed written comments. I think, as you've heard, the proposed cuts are going to devastate the more than 4 million Californians with disabilities in need of units designed with features accessible to them. But there's a figure that I really want to focus on. We know from HCD's analysis of fair housing impediments that 17.9% of lower income households include someone with an ambulatory limitation that would need a mobility unit. Your current standard is 10%. You're going to reduce that to 5%. So we are currently meeting less than half of the percentage of lower income households who will qualify with mobility units, and you're proposing to cut that further. Similarly, 12.8% of lower income households who would qualify for these units include someone with a hearing or vision disability who would benefit from the communication features and technology that are required in communication units. Again, we're proposing to cut that from 4% to 2%. These cuts are directly aimed at and have the result of reducing access for people who need these features the most and who otherwise qualify for TCAC. And as you've heard from a number of speakers, people with mobility and community disabilities are at the intersection of all of the communities that TCAC serves. They're people of color, they're elderly, they're families with children, they're working adults, and they're homeless. So this is not a cut to just a small group of people. It is a large group of people spread out among all the types of projects that TCAC provides tax credits to. It's indisputable that the need for accessible units and TCAC housing far exceeds the existing accessible unit developments, which now are proposed to be cut in half or more than half in the case of seniors. We also want to point out that there are significant legal problems with the proposal. One of those my colleague Natasha is going to talk about a little bit later, but I want to flag that they have a discriminatory impact on people with disabilities and may potentially violate the American with Disabilities Act, the California Fair Employment and Housing Act, and California Government Code 11135 regarding discrimination in government programs. And we'll be addressing those issues in more detail in our written comments. The proposed cuts ignore the need and provide no real justification for its assertions of cost savings. We know the cost of providing accessible features and immobility units is negligible percentage of overall construction costs in new construction, and communication units are negligible costs regardless of where they are put. Even in rehab projects, the incremental costs of this regulation are not substantial, and the building codes themselves, as well as the existing TCAC regulations, provide for modifications where such costs are infeasible in a rehabilitation project. But even if there are some costs, they need to be weighed against the enormous benefits of opening affordable housing to people with disabilities instead of shutting them out from the units completely, which is what happens if they're not accessible. Housing policy determinations always include an analysis of benefits, not just costs, which is missing from the proposed changes. As Bill Paveo, the former TCAC director, pointed out in his comments about the overwhelming public benefit that led to the adoption of these regulations. We would also note that one of the factors leading to this adoption was the fact that TCAC had previously not enforced and had been out of compliance with even the minimal requirements for accessible units for a number of years. So this was an attempt in part to make up for prior deficiencies. We also know from TCAC's own 2014 study, let me just give you two examples of how you have to appropriately do a public benefit versus cost analysis. TCAC's 2014 study shows that housing for large families is more costly than other housing, but we don't stop building it because it's more costly, because we know there is a huge benefit to families with children who otherwise would really suffer. Similarly, we know that building quality, this was flagged in the study, that building quality and durability are more expensive than cheap construction that engenders expensive maintenance down the road. But TCAC doesn't tolerate shoddy construction just because it's a little more expensive. So there is no reason that we can understand to shut people with disabilities out by failing to provide necessary accessibility that is where there is a documented need, just because there may be a minimal or cost saving to some developers. I also want to say that the comment that there may be a lack of demand for these units can't be given credence with, because TCAC has never monitored the regulations it has adopted that require owners to do marketing to the disability community and housing priorities for people with disabilities. We know the demand is out there. DRC is one of the lawyers that brought the LA lawsuit where the city was sued by us and by HUD and by the Justice Department for failing to provide adequate accessible housing. As a result, LA is the only city that actually monitors right now the number of people waiting for accessible units in affordable housing in LA. There are almost 9,000 people on waiting lists for accessible units in LA. It is inconceivable that there is an inadequate demand for these units. I also want to flag a problem in the rationale for the cuts in the senior units, because it's a misunderstanding of the law, and we will address it more in our comments in writing, but I wanted to bring it to the attention of the committee. The rationale is that people can ask to have an adaptable unit made into an accessible unit. First of all, that their mobility units have some adaptable features, and most units have some adaptable features, and everybody is entitled and required to get notice of those adaptable features. But units with adaptable features do not provide the same level of accessibility as the full mobility units that are required by the 10%, or in senior housing, 50%. And there is no way to make an adaptable unit fully accessible for someone with a wheelchair or a walker. Let me give you just one example out of many that we will talk about in our written comments. In an adaptable unit, you have the ability to add grab bars. You have the ability to remove a cabinet so a wheelchair can move up to the kitchen sink. However, there is no requirement in adaptable units for a significant radius in the bathroom. And if you use a wheelchair or a walker, there is no way to make, without an enormous expense, to make an adaptable unit accessible so that you can actually independently move your wheelchair or walker into the bathroom, turn around, use the bathroom, and exit. It is not possible to make an adaptable unit fully accessible for someone who has a significant mobility disability. So to cut accessible units and argue that adaptable units will provide the same accessibility for an aging population in senior housing is just factually inaccurate. And that change should not be accepted. We do support notifying people of their right to get changes to the adaptable features, but that is not the same thing as a mobility unit that is needed by people who use wheelchairs and canes and walkers. We will provide much more information and examples, and I know you're going to hear from a lot of people who are personally affected by this, as well as at least a couple of my colleagues. But I want to urge the committee to reject these cuts as bad policy without achieving a significant cost reduction. Housing with accessibility means people with disabilities are shut out of affordable housing. They literally can't get in the door. Slamming the door in the face of the disability community is a travesty in the current housing crisis. We welcome the opportunity to provide additional information or meet with you. We reached out in 2016 when this issue was first floated. TCAC told us they would get back to us and set up a meeting in 2019 when this cut was proposed as part of the Treasurer's meetings in the community. We wrote and asked to meet with the TCAC. They wrote back and said they'd set up that meeting. We didn't hear a thing since 2019 until we got 7 days notice of these cuts. We think there is room for a realistic discussion about the impact of these and ways to resolve any concerns that some developers may have. And we again offer the committee and the staff the opportunity to provide additional information or meet with you if there are specific problems that need to be addressed. But we urge you to reject these cuts. Thank you for your time and your consideration of our comments and for listening to the large number of people who are desperate for accessible housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Next comment we have is Walter Park.
All right, I think I have unmuted myself. Thank you. I endorse the comments of every single person who has spoken so far today. And I want to thank you for the personal effort you've made and for your experience and expertise. And therefore, I don't need to say most of what I had intended to because it has been said repeatedly, and I think it will be said to you again repeatedly. It appears to me, though, that TCAC has gone off the tracks. I don't understand what has happened here. Instead of increasing accessibility and affordability for California citizens, you want to actually reduce the access of affordable housing. And I just can't comprehend how you have gone that way. It appears to me that you are seeing as your constituents maybe the developers who you work with closely rather than people with disabilities and seniors in California. I would really like to know. Someone has raised the question of all the waivers that have been given to your previous accessibility requirements. I would like to see a report on those waivers. I'd like to see a report on the number that were requested and the number that were granted, because now those come into question. Now that it appears that that was actually your tendency, I'm more concerned about those being routine and frequent instead of infrequent. You know that the basic principle in California, and California has been a leader since the 1970s, and even earlier on accessibility, is to make it possible to live independently. In order to do that, we need to deepen subsidies. You know the market does not work for people with disabilities or for seniors on fixed incomes. There is no market housing for us, period. Therefore, the subsidized housing is really what we care about, and much of that is rehabilitation. We're concerned just as much about rehabilitation as new construction. In fact, more, because there's so much more of it that comes online at any given time or can be changed to become accessible at any given time. You also know that the proportion of people with disabilities is increasing, it's not decreasing. Better healthcare means more people with disabilities live into old age. And you also know, without being told, that we have more seniors than ever. And so the general need in the population as a whole is not shrinking, it is not getting smaller. It is getting larger, it's getting larger every year. And particularly right now, of course, we have a pandemic. We're going to have a whole bunch of new people apparently with chronic conditions. They're going to have mobility problems, they're going to have mental health problems, and we need to be able to deal with those too. I'm concerned about leadership in the state of California. I don't think we want to be known as failing these two very vulnerable populations. I don't think Democratic Party office holders want to be known as failing these two very vulnerable populations. I'm concerned about your comment, not your comment, but a statement that that these are not needed, that these units are not needed. If it appears to developers that their accessible units are not needed, then they need to increase and improve their marketing. Mismatches are very common. There's an old HUD study that showed that only 26% of accessible units went to people who needed them, and the others went to people who didn't actually need those features. We might be doing a little better than that now, but if there is any perception based on any kind of anecdotal experience, we need to know more about what the basis for that is, because as several people have pointed out, the numbers of people with disabilities who need this housing is vast. I have spent about 3 years working with one disabled person in my neighborhood who had become completely homeless, trying to get him into housing. It just didn't work. Finally, when the COVID hotels came online, Governor Newsom's program and also a local reflected program, he got housing. And I saw his health get better in just a few months. His physical health and his mental health got so much better for having a single room occupancy accessible unit in a hotel. My fear is that in the end of December, that money's going to go away and he may wind up on the street again. And it breaks my heart to see homeless people on the street with disabilities or without disabilities. You have gone the wrong way, and I really would like to know why. I ask you to completely reconsider. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. And you're going to hear a lot more of this today, and I hope that you'll seriously reconsider and maybe also look at the way that you maintain ongoing communications with the disability community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Park. All right, is Helen O'Connell there? Helen, are you there?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Helen O'Connell. I'm the chair of disability organization for initiating total equality or dog fight. And I am also board chair of Resources for Independent Living in Sacramento. I feel that all units should be accessible and affordable. All units should be accessible. If you make it affordable and you can't get into the unit, it's not affordable to that person. It is much cheaper to build accessible units to begin with than it is to retrofit anything. It's easier to draw the line on a piece of paper and take out one or two steps at the beginning of the design process than it is to remove the one or two steps that are in front of the building to get into the building. It's easier to make a ramp than it is to build steps. I am very confused about the statement that there's not enough demand for reasonable accommodation units and totally accessible units. If this is the case, then someone needs to let people with disabilities know where the units are so that they can apply for them and make good use of units that are already there. I am concerned because I am a wheelchair user. I am wheelchair bound. Therefore, I cannot get up to walk up 2 stairs. And I am lucky to have
an apartment of what I may get around in. But I have an elderly mother because the doorway is ugly. She has to come out of her apartment and we have to meet somewhere else to be able to communicate. That is outrageous. And I'm looking for an accessible apartment for her to be able to use her manual wheelchair in, because right now she can't use her manual wheelchair, be out of the wheelchair, fold it up, and open it up outside the door. That's acceptable and it's unsafe. And I strongly concur with all of the other people that have spoken on this subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Sydney Perkin, or Pickerns, sorry.
Good afternoon. My name is Sydney Pickern, and I'm an attorney at Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. DREDF is a national law and policy organization that advocates on a wide variety of disability rights issues, including access to housing and homelessness prevention. I am also a person with a physical disability and a wheelchair user, and so these proposed changes to the low-income housing tax credit program to roll back access affect both our constituency at DREDF and they also affect me personally. I will be a renter for the rest of my entire adult life, and finding an affordable wheelchair accessible unit in California, and particularly in the East Bay where my job is located, has been a constant struggle. And we know it's extremely challenging for the over 150,000 people currently living on our streets, many of whom also have disabilities. We are at a time now in California where we must be thinking about how to make all units accessible for everyone and not the opposite. As our aging and homelessness population continues to grow, increasing access to affordable, accessible housing units will be fundamental to ensuring that homelessness and unnecessary institutionalization are not something that we continue to accept as okay. As Californians, especially now, we need to be the example of how to design for full access to our communities and not actively take steps to reverse the progress we have made in this area. We are in a long-term, affordable, accessible housing battle. The time was quite frankly yesterday, but the time is also now. And we urge the committee to reject these proposed reductions to accessible housing development. Thank you.
Thank you, Sydney. We have Natasha Reyes.
Thank you. My name is Natasha Reyes. I'm an attorney with Disability Rights California, representing people with disabilities throughout the state. And as you've heard from many before, we urge you to reject the proposed changes to sections 10325, subsection F7K and G2B, which cut accessible development in half. Before I get into more substantive issues, I'd like to note some accessibility concerns that have happened on this meeting. You've heard from a few folks already today who had issues with reasonable accommodations. I've also heard from people on the phone that said the connection dropped at one point, and many people have dropped off the call unable to offer comments. Moreover, it's not clear how people can join the queue in order to comment on the phone line, not the folks on Zoom. Also, as you've heard, the very short notice was not enough time for people to review the over 60 pages of proposed changes. We do want to acknowledge the time and hard work that staff put into drafting those changes, but we also ask for enough time for the public to review and offer substantive comments on the changes ahead of hearings and in writing. We've heard from folks who have not had their reasonable accommodation request granted. We've also noted that there's no closed captioning, there is no chat or Q&A features available on the Zoom, so that people can note when there are issues. For example, during the presentation, there were times where the volume became very low and it was hard to hear what the staff presenters were saying. So in addition to those issues, as you've heard, California is currently experiencing an unprecedented housing crisis. There's an ever-increasing number of people who are experiencing homelessness, many of whom are homeless because they have mobility, hearing, and vision disabilities and can't find accessible, affordable housing, the same housing that TCAC is now proposing to cut. And this cut is furthermore materially inconsistent with TCAC's obligation to affirmatively further fair housing as required by California law. Instead of creating housing opportunities to address fair housing constraints for people with disabilities, it slashes housing opportunities. Because several HCD programs also cross-reference TCAC's requirements, this is going to reduce accessibility in those programs as well, only magnifying the legal violation to affirmatively further fair housing. HCD recently released its analysis of impediments to fair housing, which is required by HUD. As you've heard, that report found that over 4 million Californians have disabilities and face challenges finding accessible, affordable housing. That report also sets TCAC's existing accessible housing requirements as a goal for the all state housing programs as part of the state's plan to fulfill the mandate to affirmatively further fair housing. And TCAC's proposed reduction, in addition to violating its own obligation to affirmatively further fair housing, contradicts the state's plan. Additionally, or in addition to the many people who have disabilities and are experiencing homelessness, there are many more who cannot leave facilities and are segregated from their communities because of a lack of affordable, accessible housing. You've heard from many individuals today who have said how important it is for them to be able to live independently in their communities, and how accessible, affordable housing is the best way to do that. So TCAC's proposal to cut accessible, affordable housing in its program would really only perpetuate segregation. As you heard from my colleague, Dara Scher, and from TCAC's former director, Bill Paveo, in 2014, TCAC adopted higher accessibility requirements as recognition of decades of non-compliance. Despite repeated requests, TCAC has not released information about accessible units, including how many have been built or how many waivers have been granted, and we cannot imagine that TCAC has made up for the history of non-compliance in the 5 years that this rule has been effective. So with COVID-19 rates increasing, with housing needs increasing, we urge TCAC not to roll back housing accessibility. Please reject the proposal to cut accessibility development requirements, and please ensure that any future public hearings are made accessible to people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reyes. Nisha Vyas?
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much. My name is Nisha Vyas. I'm a senior attorney with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. Our organization advocates for low-income Californians in the areas of health, housing, and public benefits. We are also a legal services support center, and I just want to join, or on behalf of Western Center, join with our colleagues and partners who have spoken on the phone today, as well as all of the individuals with lived experience in opposing any proposal for the reduction of accessibility percentages in senior housing. I want to specifically lift up a point that Ms. Reyes touched upon. California requires all of its public agencies, including the Tax Credit Allocation Committee, to administer programs and activities related to housing and community development in a manner to affirmatively further fair housing, and not to take any action that is materially inconsistent with this obligation. That is in Government Code Section 8899.50 and added by AB 686. The proposed regulatory cut to the amount of required accessible housing units by half falls squarely in the definition of taking action materially inconsistent with the obligation to affirmatively further fair housing. We join again with our partners and colleagues in opposing this action that we would assert violates the committee's obligation as a public agency to ensure that it addresses significant disparities in housing needs and access to opportunity, and fosters and maintains compliance with civil rights and fair housing laws, which of course importantly include people with disabilities. And we note that people with disabilities, that this population intersects across other protected characteristics under the fair housing and civil rights laws. So thank you for your consideration of our concern and our comments today. I will leave it there, and thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment. Sophia. Sophia, are you there? Sophia, we can't hear you. I think you're still muted.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Reverend Sophia DeWitt, and I serve as Program Director at East Bay Housing Organizations. EBHO is a membership organization dedicated to the creation and preservation of affordable housing and the protection of tenants, particularly low-income communities and communities of color in the East Bay. We are based in Oakland in Alameda County, but also serve in an advocacy role in Contra Costa County. Many of our members are nonprofit affordable housing developers who interact with TCAC and CIDLAC very frequently. This is not a proposal that our members are asking for, and this is deeply of concern to many of them who serve low-income individuals and people with disabilities and strive to do that on a daily basis. Our members create housing, affordable housing, and seek to provide housing opportunities to folks at the lowest income levels possible with the deepest subsidy. And many of our members also provide supportive housing to individuals with a variety of disabilities. This is not something that our members are asking for. So along with a huge range of people that you've heard from today, I am asking you to reject the regulatory changes proposed for sections 10325F7K and sections 10325G2B, and maintain the current accessible and affordable housing standards, which, as several people have mentioned, actually, to meet the scale of the need that exists in this state and that is only growing, need to be raised and increased and not reduced. providing accessible housing and affordable housing creates a great public benefit at minimal cost, as has been mentioned. And, you know, creating accessible units in the beginning with new construction is less costly than having to rehab units, but the rehab standards for accessible units should also be maintained. We will be submitting more detailed written comments by the comment deadline, and also working to get several of our member organization developers to submit comments as well and interact with you all on this issue. But so as a professional, this is an extremely important issue. On a personal level, this is also important to me as an individual who uses a wheelchair and a walker. I live in a unit that is not fully accessible, that I have been able to access on the private market, because at this point in my life, I am lucky to be able to have a job with income that allows me to do that. But as several others have spoken, I will be a renter for the rest of my adult life. I will not always be working. I will need accessible housing for the entirety of my life. And I will say that even though I have income that allows me to rent on the private market, and I am living in a below market rate unit, the most significant issue that I have faced throughout my professional life is securing accessible housing. And I almost had to give up the job which I currently hold because it was so difficult for me to find a unit that would accommodate my needs and start work on time and you know, begin working for my agency. So I know it's extremely difficult for me. It's 10 or 20 times more difficult for the many people in the disability community who can't work for a variety of reasons, or have been discriminated against and are not able to find work, and live on a range of public benefits here in the state. So reducing the accessibility requirements goes absolutely in the wrong way, and as several people have also mentioned, goes against TCAC's obligation to affirmatively further fair housing. So professionally and personally, I urge you to reject these changes, and we look forward to commenting further and in more detail in writing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, Renee Williams.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, good afternoon, and thank you to TCAC for accepting public comments. My name's Renee Williams. I am a senior attorney with the National Housing Law Project. We are based in San Francisco, and the National Housing Law Project is a national and statewide legal advocacy preserving and improving affordable housing and expanding and enforcing the rights of low-income tenants and homeowners. So that is our perspective. You know, I really just want to echo a lot of the comments that have already been made, and really urge TCAC to, you know, reject the proposed changes to the LIHTC program reflected in sections 10325 F7K and 10325 G2B. We will also be submitting our own comments by the November 20th deadline. And again, you know, just really thankful for all the folks who have spoken, particularly, you know, our colleagues in the disability rights community, and especially folks who experience disabilities, who've really spoken to how crucial accessible housing is to their everyday lives. I wanted to touch on a couple things that folks have spoken on. And really one is, because NHLP is also a national organization, I just really urge TCAC to understand the need for California to be a leader in making the LIHTC program accessible to folks who have experienced a range of disabilities. California, as many parts of the country, does have a history of segregating people with disabilities. I think Mr. Carnazes spoke to this. And folks have also mentioned AB 686, the obligation of affirmatively further fair housing, which requires state agencies to affirmatively further fair housing. And as others have spoken about, like we believe that these changes would contravene that specific legal requirement in Government Code 8899.50. So I would also just again point folks to analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, which HCD spent a long time putting together, and it's really meant to be the state's roadmap, the statewide roadmap for ensuring and expanding fair housing choice, and really understanding fair housing issues that are raised. And this was a year-long process or more. I can't remember exactly the timeline, but there was a lot of public input into that process. And as folks have alluded to, we have a lot of housing issues in California around affordability and fair housing and equal access. And even through all of that, one of the impediments that were identified when it was all said and done was insufficient accessible housing stock, and an insufficient, lack of adequate accessible housing options compared to the need. And so I really encourage you to look at the analysis of impediments, particularly impediment 10, but also, just the various places in that plan that really speak to the barriers that folks who experience disabilities have in terms of being able to access, accessible housing that is also affordable. And I think that's all I have, but thank you again for allowing us to speak today.
Thank you, Renee. We have some folks on the phone, and I think we've been taking comments from the Zoom. So we're going to go ahead and switch to the phone real quick and take some of those. And for those, by way of reminder, if you have a comment and you want to join or make the comment on the phone, you press 1 and then 0, and then you'll be put into a queue. So we're going to go ahead and switch over to the phone real quick.
You have 8 questions remaining.
Hello?
Hello, am I there?
Yes.
Perfect, thanks. I heard at the very beginning of the public comment period that there will be a cable published on the public comment period. When can we expect that?
I'm sorry, a cable?
Yeah, I imagine that when someone used the word cable, they probably just meant like a transcript.
Well, I mean, we're going to summarize the comments received at this hearing, but it's probably going to be, I don't know, we do it at the conclusion of the comment period, and then we ultimately publish it in a spreadsheet format.
Oh, okay, great. And where will that be available?
It'll be on the TCAC website, so www.treasurer.ca.gov/CTCAC.
Perfect. Will that be in the regulation section like this information was today?
Yes, it will.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
You have 7 questions remaining.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you for letting me submit comments today on the proposed changes to low-income housing tax credit regulations. My name is Connie Arnold. I'm a longtime disability rights advocate for over 30 years, a motorized wheelchair user, and a former resident of low-income housing. And I'm here to ask you not to cut accessibility requirements in the TCAC projects, not to reduce requirements for fully accessible units generally in section 10325F7K, or the requirements for fully accessible units in senior projects, section 10325G2B. I spent years advocating on a number of issues, and housing has always been one of them. And I've advocated for people in Marin County, Los Angeles County, Sonoma County, and Sacramento County for accessible and affordable housing. Right now, there is a major shortage, and has been a dire shortage, of low-income housing units for the population of persons with disabilities and seniors who live on fixed disability incomes. And that growing need is only increasing, including increasing with the COVID situation, as we're looking to possibly moving people out of skilled nursing facilities, and also in general on waivers, Medicaid waivers, to get them to move into the community, then the more costly cost of keeping people in nursing homes, where people are actually dying in groves. So I have friends who are in wheelchairs, who are living on SSI and other disability benefits, and the incomes are so extremely low. The rents are so high, and there is so few accessible low-income housing units. And I'm including very low-income housing units, which is under the area median income of 0 to 30% of the housing stock that is needed by those individuals. And there is too few housing units available to accommodate the need. Many people with disabilities are having to stay with their families if they can, or they're homeless because of the lack of housing stock that's accessible and affordable to somebody on very, very low income levels. I used to live in low income housing in Marin County, so I really know the need, and accessible units need to also be wheelchair accessible. So with the growing aging population, the numbers of people that are homeless are veterans and people with disabilities and seniors and families living on the streets. We need to reverse this decision and proposal and go the other direction, because as Dara Scher and Natasha Reyes and from DRC and a number of speakers have testified to, is we want to live in the community, and we need to address the housing shortage. I can only assume that this proposition came up because of the moneyed interests that build housing and have put pressure on CTAC to I'm getting some back testimony here, to basically want to reduce the requirements for accessibility. In general, building industry people do not want to have to provide housing accessibility or meet housing accessibility requirements. But I'm asking the TCAC, please reject the housing proposed cuts. And I want to also mention to you that under the HUD guidelines for housing limits, extremely low income is 0 to 30% of area median income. Those are usually the individuals that are on SSI and disability benefits. And then you have very low income from 30 to 50% of AMI, and lower income 50 to 80% of AMI. At 10% of units, it's still a shortage of units for accessibility that is provided in any of the housing stock that's built. And I'm in shock that even these income guidelines, even under, say, home remodeling, home renovation projects, this would disqualify somebody on disability benefits who didn't have at least $17,000 under CDBG monies to to afford to even participate. So we've actually put in discriminatory laws and rules, of which your proposal is, to make it harder for people to get their needs for housing met, whether it's housing stock availability for apartment units or for the home repair programs in different cities throughout the state. It's a real big problem. And I think also this kind of comes on the heels back in July, this proposal, where we had to oppose the housing community development for bathing and toilet facilities and showers, where they wanted to propose a 36 by 36 inch shower transfer shower for accessibility for a roll-in shower in apartment units and public housing. It's ridiculous. So I see this proposal, like many, coming forward during COVID-19 to try to sneak under the rug or under our noses to make changes that will devastate the disability and senior communities and people who are veterans and homeless individuals to have their housing needs met. So at this point, I would ask you to please don't reduce the requirements for fully accessible units and reject the changes that are being proposed. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak. And I really hope that we can move into a different direction that goes along with the fact that the population of California is aging. More people are going to have a greater need for accessible housing, accessible low-income housing, very low-income housing. And let's improve rather than reduce. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You have 6 questions remaining.
Good morning. Is someone there?
Yes.
Yes. My name is Vidal Medina. I'm Assistant Change Advocate for Resources for Independence, Central Valley, in catchment areas of Merced, Madera, Fresno, Kings, and Tulare counties. And I'd like to thank you first for the opportunity to speak, but I also want to reject the reduction in accessible and affordable housing units by 50%. I've had this conversation with Fiona Ma, who came through the valley twice when she was doing her housing tours, and it was kind of interesting. And even then, and this has been probably about a year and a half ago, the developers wanted these cuts, and we all that were there were talking about the same thing, why they shouldn't be. So I'll mention in the counties that I work in, and I've been an advocate for the same agency for 18 years, and I've always seen this kind of progression where we are losing the availability of affordable and accessible housing. Now, a lot of folks in housing, even the state treasurers, they only talk about affordability, and we forget that if you're working with populations that are being talked about today, it's accessibility as well, not just affordability. But here in the Central Valley, we don't have the housing stock that would even accommodate anything. So when there was talk about these mandates for units, we kind of saw like a glimmer of light, some of us advocates, and thought that perhaps putting this requirement of this mandate to developers, whether it be profit or nonprofit developers, that we may see an increase in availability of housing stock for our consumers. That is not going to, well, it hasn't happened for one, and it's not going to happen if there's a decrease. When I had an opportunity to speak at one of the housing tours for Mrs. Ma, my recommendation to her was that these things be increased instead of decreased. That the physical disability units be up to 20%, and the visual and hearing impaired units will go up to 10%, and the senior accessibility features or units go up 75%. Now, because what I'm looking at is the inability of housing here in the valley. And we've got, our population is quite diverse in disabilities. Our agency provides services for all disabilities, including seniors who self-identify as persons with disabilities as well. I thank you again for the opportunity, and this is a serious issue. We are one of 28 ILCs in California, and again, we serve the Central Valley. Thank you again. Over.
Thank you.
You have 4 questions remaining. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. This is Holland DeLille, and I think it's time that we talk about what this really is about. And it's about unexamined bigotry and prejudice. I hope it's unexamined anyway. We all have responsibilities as adults to look at our biases and prejudices and examine them, because we all have them. We're born with them, we're taught them as we grow up. We encounter them every day, and they're reinforced every day. But particularly in your position as this important committee, it's really important for you to examine yourself for any biases and prejudices and bigotry you may have against people with disabilities. Because what you're proposing really proves that you have not examined that prejudice and that bias against us. I know this because I have been working for accessible housing since 1980, when I put together a representation throughout the state to work on the first accessible housing regulations for the California building standards. And at that time, of course, the opposition was enormous. We had California Building Industry Association against us, Building Owners and Managers Association against us, even Cowboy was against us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we did manage to get something through, because I think the officials at HCD, Housing and Community Development Department, did examine their biases and prejudices against us. And so we made some progress. We were allowed to have accessibility in apartments and condominiums of 3 units for condos and 4 units or more in a building for apartments. And then in 1988, we were able to raise that so that we had 4 units or more in a building for condos. So we had 4 units per building for apartments and condos, and 20% overall. And of course, the building industry found clever ways to get around all of that. I won't go into the details, but you know how poorly those requirements in the California Building Code were not enforced, or how poorly they were enacted. So what we need to do is recognize that we're operating under a bias that is just not logical, because studies have shown that the human condition is such that people will experience a disability sometime in their lifespan. Now, they did a study some years ago in which they determined that between the ages of 16 and 74, 73% of the population would experience a mobility disability, hopefully just a broken leg, few weeks, whatever. But the reality is that human beings do not exist in perfect condition until the moment they die. Most of us don't. And particularly as we age, we have a greater likelihood to have a disability. So we can't keep saying we'll just make a small percentage of housing accessible and available to everybody, to the few that we think are out there. The reality is 100% of all housing should be accessible, even to the minimum standards that we have in the California Building Code right now? Or how about to the universal design concept? It's just not logical to say only a percentage of housing needs to be accessible when a great percent of the human population is going to need accessibility sometime in their lifetime. And further, we need that it's whether, well, how it's just not practical. There is no way you're ever going to match need and availability. So in your statement, you said the reason, one of the reasons you're reducing the accessible housing percentage is because the accessible units weren't being occupied by people with disabilities. Now, how can you possibly come up with a program that would match the need to the availability? It's not possible. So that's why you should have all housing units be minimally accessible at least, and we can work on improving that as we go along. But people have to be able to get into the unit. They have to have doors wide enough to get through in their walkers and their wheelchairs. They have to have turnaround space in the bathroom. And if you could possibly, get to your better person, your better half of yourself, how about new space underneath the lavatories and the kitchen sink? How about access in the kitchen and access to storage and access to the outdoors? This is just an issue of logic and recognizing the inherent bias that exists in all of us. I think it's built in our DNA. And particularly, if you're a person with disability as I am, you recognize it every day when you go out. We see it in people every day, the fear in their eyes, because they don't want it to happen to them. And I really do think it's genetic. It's because they're always cautious about anything different. So we need to examine that and ask you as committee members, please look at yourself carefully and see that there is no logic to reducing access, especially based upon your reasoning that you can't make the match exactly between the need and the availability. Please take a look at this and realize that 2% is not enough, 4% is not enough. It needs to be universal because that is the human condition. And when you become a person with a disability, you don't become less human and you don't become less worthy of consideration by bodies like yourself. So thank you for this opportunity. And I hope you're paying attention to some of us who sound angry. We should be angry. You would be angry if you experienced the kind of prejudice that we experience on a daily basis. And I hope you pay attention to the logic presented by the attorneys and the many other people, and pay attention to what we're saying, and please don't dismiss it. This is important. This can impact you. You could experience a disability. Thank you again.
Thank you.
You have 3 questions remaining.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
My name is Regina Frank, and I am president of the ACB Capital Chapter of the California Council of the Blind, located in Sacramento, California. I have worked in the blind and low vision community now since 2004. And what I can tell you is, as a person that was a resource counselor and a crisis intervention counselor, I often encountered housing as being one of the biggest barriers to people's emotional well-being. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak on this subject. I am supporting the position of disability rights of California and the other organizations that have spoken against these proposed cuts. And I want to just tell you that I think that there is a misunderstanding that people with disabilities do not live independently and have lots of family members to be there to meet their needs, and that the need for independent housing is sort of a luxury. It is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And just as you need housing and you need lights that turn on, you need them to work, you need workable appliances, you need to be able to cook, you need to be able to use your lavatory and use your kitchen facilities. If someone cut those off for you, I believe you would have an issue as well. And so I'm appealing to you. A lot of times we look at numbers, and that's your job. I get it. But numbers represent people. And as has been stated, there's 4 million people who are disabled in California. And of those that qualify for affordable and low-income housing, 520,000 roughly, I worked out the percentages, are blind, low vision, deaf, hard of hearing. And 720,000 are people who use mobility aids. That is over 1 million people, if I'm doing my math correctly. You guys are probably better at math than me. But that's over 1 million people. Now, I understand you balance many interests, but I would appeal to you that being able to cook, use the lavatory, do basic things on one's own has to do with dignity. It has to do with humanity. And we are perfectly capable of living independently and being very active and valuable to our community. I have worked since the age of 16 in various community jobs. I worked for Head Start. I worked for the Women, Infant, Child program. So we do more than just serve like disabled people just get disabled jobs. No, we serve the community as a whole. I raised 4 children on my own as a single parent, and I am totally blind, and I did that independently. And so these things are living issues for us, where they may be numbers on a paper for you. And so I'm appealing because I believe all of us do have a sense of humanity and a sense of community. And most of us want to do something that helps our society. And this will help society as a whole. And that's where I'm making my appeal. I echo the comments of other people. I'm just going to tell you that it's a helpless feeling as a counselor to tell a client that there's nothing available for them and that their current condition is going to continue because there's simply no way to get them into an affordable, accessible unit. And as I said, I did that for 9 years, that type of counseling, and I just want you to put yourself in my position and imagine telling someone, a client with a disability face to face, that there is no housing available for them right now. And the waiting lists might be, 3 years, 5 years, and in some places longer than that. So thank you for the ability to address the committee, and I'm just hoping that something we have said here can make a difference to you.
Thank you.
You have 3 questions remaining.
Yes, my name is Jeff Tom. I am the Governmental Affairs Director for the California Council of the Blind. We are the largest and oldest organization organization of consumers of vision loss in the state. I want to associate myself with all of the comments that have been made before in terms of not wanting the accessible housing requirements to be reduced. And because so much has already been said, I don't want to be overly redundant, so I'll focus on just a couple of points. I think the Treasurer's Office must have missed the message with respect to at least 3 priorities of the legislature and the governor. And these have all been sort of touched on, but I'm going to underscore them. The first is the Aging Master Plan, where this state the goal of this state is to make the community more livable for seniors and people with disabilities. And clearly this does not comport with that goal. The second is the housing shortage. Bills have been passed for the last several years. We know that the homelessness epidemic is still a severe problem. And, you know, when it comes to the demand or lack thereof, I can speak from some experience. As president of the California Council of the Blind for approximately the last, well, not the last 10 years, but over a period of about 10 years, I can't tell you about the number of calls that I received concerning people who needed accessible housing. I have never received one notification from any developer of any project for which accessible housing for persons with vision loss was built. So how would I be able to refer those people to anybody? Perhaps one of the problems is that we have not had enough communication with both the Treasurer's Office and people who are developing these housing units. Maybe that's why there seems to be a misunderstanding with respect to this committee in terms of whether the essential purpose for the program is to make profit for the developers or whether it is really to create more affordable and accessible housing. And hopefully the testimony of today, you know, straightens that out. The second priority, or well, the final priority is really the pandemic. As one of the witnesses mentioned, one of the goals of the pandemic is to, the governor's treatment of the pandemic is to transition individuals from hospitals and nursing homes into the community as much as possible to avoid the problems that arise when individuals are living in institutional settings. If you have less accessible housing, you of course are diminishing the potential to achieve that goal. So with that, I want to thank you again for the opportunity, and I urge you to reject this portion of the proposal.
Thank you.
You have 2 questions remaining.
Hello?
Hi, sorry about that. My name is Emma Dinkelspiel. I'm an attorney at Bay Area Legal Aid. I apologize for the background sound. I've been waiting for a while. I am speaking just to comment on the effect of the current lack of affordable housing on the people we serve, and especially on affordable accessible housing. I just want to back up with what we're hearing from folks. A vast number of our client population are currently not in affordable housing, right? And have been on wait lists for a very long time. We work with a lot of people who are trying to get on SSI right now, and it's very common for us to down with them and say, hey, what have you done to get on housing? And to hear, well, I've been on wait lists for, as a prior speaker noted, 3 years, 5 years, or in a few memorable cases, 10 or more years, and I'm still waiting. And it is very much not uncommon for waitlist to pop for clients who can't take advantage of that because the apartment is not accessible, because they physically couldn't live there, because it would mean getting upstairs that they can't navigate, because it would mean not being able to move their wheelchair through the unit. That is a frequent occurrence insofar as waitlist pop at all. And that really profound lack is is doubled up by the fact that we've got people who are currently in affordable housing who become disabled, who have become blind, lose their mobility, age into it, and suddenly need an accessible unit and find themselves waiting. Again, it's not common to have people who call in and say, hey, I've been waiting to get into an accessible unit for a year or 2 years. And for us to just have to say, yeah, that sucks, that's not rare at all. There are so few units available. So to suggest, I just wanted to speak to the magnitude of the problem as it currently stands, and to hope that a further reduction of the availability of such units is not in the cards, and to stand by the personal testimony provided by so many disabled tenants across California today. Thanks so much.
You have 1 question remaining.
Hi, this is Margie Donovan. Good afternoon. I want to thank you very much for hosting this. And I am totally blind, and until the last 10 years, I have been a renter, mainly of apartments. And I'm not speaking on behalf of blind veterans, but my career was with the Department of Veterans Affairs, working with blind veterans. And I rise to speak today about accessibility or lack thereof in apartments in particular, with multiple units that would require under fair housing accessibility. And some of the things I ran into, and we're going to run into more and more as technology develops, and if we do not have built-in accessibility, is digital thermostats, which we cannot operate as blind people, digital stoves with the flat panels, which presents a challenge, and frequently the lack of ability to properly set our refrigerator or freezer because of lack of accessibility. That being said, with the advance in technology today, it is very easy to make all of these things accessible. Oh, let me get back, because in the area in which I now live in Folsom, there's a lot of apartments that rent with washers and dryers, which frequently blind people can't use because they are digital. And I had one other thing and it slipped my mind, so it really doesn't matter. I do want to say, in working with blind vets, my experience is many of our vets were unable to maintain independent living due to inaccessibility in their apartments. Frequently means they move to a state veterans home, which is much more costly, and not a veteran's desire when they lose their sight to go live in a nursing home type facility. I ask each and every one of you today on this panel to seriously consider the fact that one day you could possibly be blind or in a wheelchair or hearing impaired such that you need a flashing alarm system for fire alarms in your building. And many of these lack of accessibility force people into living situations which are much more costly for the state and less desirable for people who simply are living with a disability. I ask that you reconsider this position, and I take a stand and I support the position of Disability Rights California and what every other person with a disability or disability rights attorneys and housing attorneys have spoken of today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You have 0 questions remaining.
I just want to say, I just want to thank all of the input that we've gotten from the Disabilities Rights of California, the Gray Panthers, and every other individual or group that has spoken today. I think that we're going to have to go back and revisit what we're doing. I think that by giving us such a clear response, it's been very helpful to us in terms of this. We'll still be going forward with taking all of your comments and writing, etc. But I just want to thank you all for your input today.
Okay, so we're gonna move back onto the Zoom comments. The hearing was originally scheduled till 2 through the Zoom, so if for somehow it gets disconnected in any way, just call back into the phone line. I'm going to try to get through the remaining comments on the Zoom. So if you could just be conscious of the time, we'll move through it. But again, you are more than welcome to submit your comments in writing in addition. So we're going to go to Mo Faki.
Yeah, thank you. So Mo Faki with VCA Green. We're a code consulting, energy code, Cal Green consultant, and we work with affordable housing developers as well as market rate. We also do lead consulting. And I'm commenting on section 10325, sustainable building methods. We're noticing that the entire section is being struck from the program. Wanted to let you know that, and I sent you a letter discussing this, want to let you know that some of the code implementation items are not quite equal to what green building methods and practices are brought to the project through LEED. For example, photovoltaic systems are not necessarily, they're required by code, but they're not necessarily going to be plugged into tenant units. Typically, the developer will tie solar PV systems, which are mandated this code cycle. They'll tie those systems into their common area house meters. So the tenant's not receiving full benefit of that, even though it's code required. So the site is going to be more energy efficient, and there is going to be a reduction in energy for the site, but not necessarily for the tenants. So the tenants are still going to pay the full amount of their bills. And there's also other measures that LEED may bring, or NGBS may bring, or other green building practices that help improve the building envelope, which means there's better insulation installation in these units where the tenants are more comfortable and they experience reduced energy costs because the insulation is better installed. The code requires a certain level of insulation, but it doesn't require quality installation necessarily. It may be required in low-rise projects. Developers may or may not opt for that quality insulation installation. So again, the code, it's optional per code for those residential units. There's a few others that I listed on the letter that I sent to you this morning, and wanted to just make you aware that the code doesn't necessarily equal the sustainable the sustainable methods that LEED and NGBS and other green building ratings bring forth. And you want to take a look at that closer because you may be shortchanging the occupants by striking that sustainable building methods section. And that's all for my comments.
Thank you, Mo. All right, Kaylee Lucas.
That's Kaylia. I'm going to
Kaylia.
right start. So my name is Kaylia Lucas. I'm the System Change Advocate for Resources for Independent Living in Sacramento. If you're not familiar with independent living centers, we do work to connect people with disabilities with resources that improve their autonomy and quality of life. A large part being connecting individuals and families to housing that meets both the needs of it being affordable and accessible. So I'm asking you to reject the proposed changes to sections 10.325F7K and 10.325G2B. This will make it more difficult for those with disability within the disability community to find housing that meets their needs, as well as the ability for our aging community to age in place. Many in these communities find themselves in situations where they are living on a very fixed and limited income, making affordable housing a necessity. Accessible units are imperative to them maintaining their autonomy. Without, many are constrained to being institutionalized, which is limiting of their freedom as well as pricier in the long run. Others still live in units that don't fit their accessibility needs. We heard a story earlier of someone who struggles to even leave their apartment because their own apartment isn't wheelchair accessible. Quite frankly, we should see all of this as unacceptable. Affordable and accessible housing is a must-have for California. The disabled community and the aging community deserve not just a place to live, but a place to live that meets their needs. These cuts are careless, selfish, and inconsiderate. We can do better, and we should want to do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa Cooley.
Yes, my name is Lisa Cooley. I'm a two-time former governor's appointee to 2 different governors. I strongly recommend that you oppose these cuts to affordable and accessible housing, because in the long run, more people who have developmental and intellectual and other disabilities could face the possibility of living in more restrictive environments, which is not good for people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities and is not very good for the state of California. Thank you, and I appreciate the time to speak to you.
Thank you, Ms. Cooley. Lilibeth Navarro.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Let me just. So good morning. I'm Lilibeth Navarro, Executive Director of CaLife, an independent living center in Los Angeles. I'm a wheelchair user and require full accessibility to my home myself. But for most of us, there are not too many choices, as universal design is not yet the standard for all construction. Because that's the reality in our world, we oppose the TCAC proposal to cut the percentage accessibility requirements for housing for people with disabilities and seniors. First of all, very often, we need to be at the table and discussing issues like this before they're proposed, like housing, so from the get-go, and not just included as an afterthought, which I feel our inclusion today is an afterthought. In LA, I cannot tell you how meaningful it has been to actively provide input in the discussion of every aspect of our housing settlement agreement with the city of LA. But to even be part of the direct dialogue with them took a legal case compelling our inclusion. We have not been given enough time in this case to thoughtfully read through and analyze 67 pages or so of these proposals. Every day, we add to the numbers of seniors turning 65 and people becoming disabled from sudden illness or accidents, and people with disabilities in general. In fact, the US has a graying population who will need more and not less accessibility in housing. Also, the need for accessible housing has become even more urgent with the advent of COVID-19 and the yearly fires ignited by the Santa Ana winds and other factors. Building in accessible features to housing does not necessarily increase the cost of construction. So what's the big deal? Also, increasing the age of qualification for these units, and I read this, I may have been wrong in reading it, but it jumped at me. It will be an added burden to the people with disabilities and seniors who suddenly become disabled, and for those who have waited too long for adequate housing. Foxes have holes, birds have nests, but the disabled are often homeless. They suffer substandard shelters, inaccessible homes, and are yearly terrorized by ever-changing policies like these proposals to chip at the meager gains we have made in housing. We thank our allies like Disability Rights California, DREDF, the Grey Panthers, our brothers and sisters in the independent living movement, and others who are with us down in the trenches fighting the good fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Navarro. Shella?
Good afternoon. I've been with you since this morning. I thank you guys so much for sticking with it, making sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak, and I will be brief. I'm speaking in opposition to any changes, any reduction in the requirement, the mandate for the number of accessible units. I think paradoxically, the threat in the disability community has opened up an avenue for conversation about obstacles. And the obstacle is self-identified by you, which is that the units that were constructed as handicap accessible and as adaptable are not actually occupied by the people that need those accessibility features. And I have a couple of suggestions. And the first is that developers outreach to the disability community, the specific disability communities, for the duration, not for the purpose of getting a letter that gives them additional points on their application, but a real outreach. And then the other thing that needs to happen, and I don't know if it's something that your agency does or the developers do, and that is to work with the housing authority so that the person needing the accessibility features actually has a subsidy at the time that the unit is available. And that is a piece that's missing. One could even just use the housing authorities, because of course when people apply for either project-based or tenant-based rental assistance subsidies, they check a box as to whether or not they, have a specific kind of disability. And so the housing authorities can easily point developers and property managers in the direction of people who need the accessibility features. And let me see, what else did I have here? Another couple of things that the committee could do is identify the units, proactively identify, have the developers identify the units who were built as accessible but not occupied by people needing those accessibility features. Develop a plan to move them maybe to a different, unit within the development. Work with an outreach to the specific populations that know people that need those units. And then of course work with the housing authorities to get subsidies in their hand so that they can occupy those units. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, Marty Omoto.
Hey, thank you. My name is Marty Omoto. I'm a family member of an older sister who had developmental disabilities. She passed away, and another family member with developmental disabilities. I'm also a member of the Developmental Services Task Force under the Department of Developmental Services, member since 2005 of the Olmsted Advisory Committee under the California Health and Human Services Agency. I was appointed by the governor way back in 2005. And also a member of the 2 subcommittees for the Master Plan for Aging on long-term services and supports and research. First of all, I want to thank all of you, the committee, for really listening. You've taken all the public comments, and I've been in a lot of different hearings with agencies in the legislature, and haven't experienced that before, so I really appreciate that as an advocate. And also I'm looking at you, Ms. Blackwell. I appreciate your comments and that you're taking what we've all said and we'll consider the things that we said, because one of the things from our community, this disability community, is not only to be seen but to be heard. And first of all, I want to say that I agree with a lot of the people who talked on the phone and also on Zoom, especially Disability Rights California. I'm looking at Dana, all my friends there, Natasha, and others who raised the issue of reasonable accommodations and the timing of this. And I think, the committee should really look at that, because, it's one thing to make policy changes, but if we're not part of the discussion, and I'm sure it wasn't intended, but I think we all needed to work harder to make sure that happens. Because every voice matters. And the administration and all the people on the committee have proven themselves to be really good about those issues, but sometimes we fall short. Number 2, in the interest of time, I support strongly the comments made by Disability Rights California, by the Western Center on Law and Poverty, DREDF, by the State Council. I did want to add one thing, though, is that maybe this was well intended, but lots of times things that are put forward, you know, have unintended consequences. We are in the middle of a pandemic. It has scared so many people across California, not just people with disabilities, but every Californian. And there's a reliance on trusting government and the credibility of government. This proposal and the way it was done, even if it was well intended, undermines that credibility and trust that is so critical in how we all respond to the pandemic. Number two, our community, the disability community, the senior community, we're likely facing major cuts or potential cuts next year. This isn't the right thing to do now. We are facing housing shortages. Many of our families, many of the people who provide services are going to be faced with evictions coming January. It is wrong to do at this time, even if it's well intended, because of the fear it puts into our communities. That is not the right thing to do now. And so going back to the comments that were made by Disability Rights California, put this aside for a while, work with Disability Rights California and the rest of us, and let's come up with a better plan and a better idea of how to make housing much more available and accessible to all of us. Again, I appreciate very strongly you all listening, because again, it's our experience that doesn't very much happen in other settings. And so I just want to say that does not go unnoticed, and I appreciate that. I'm looking at you, Ms. Blackwell, because that was really nice that you spoke out, and thanks again, all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Amolo. Michael Martinez. Michael, are you there?
Did you unmute me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your time, sitting with us for all these hours. And thank you for everyone that is participating. I want to speak today on the proposed regulation changes, especially on section 10325 F7K for the disabled and for the seniors, G2B. The proposed regulation changes will have a huge impact on what we consider in this community to be the most the most at-risk community, the most at-risk demographic. When I look at the HCD and TCAC website, I look under the goals for the treasurer. And two of the points are, one is to empower individuals in distressed communities, and the other one is to build wealth for all Californians. Both of these points will do the opposite of what the goal is. I notice one of the other goals is to increase opportunity for women and people of color, and I greatly commend that. But as I said before, the people with disabilities are the most at-risk community. There are people who need the advocacy that's provided and don't just need the equality and equity, but need even beyond that resources that are available. And this will be robbing them of all equality, all equity. And as a personal story, my role is I'm the housing coordinator for CalLife. CalLife stands for Communities Actively Living Independent and Free. As the housing coordinator here, my job is to locate accessible housing for people with disabilities. That is my primary role. So every day I get phone calls from tens of people, and I'm not the only one here working in that department. And these people are blind, these people are deaf, these people are in wheelchairs, and they don't have access to go look and find accessible housing on their own because of their disability limits them. Now me, as a person who's able to get around, use all the resources for me like the internet and looking online, and going in person places, I myself have an extraordinary difficult time trying to locate this housing for my clients. I have hundreds of clients in need, and this is only going to expand if we make these changes to the proposed regulations. So I just plead my case. I ask you to please reconsider the goals that the CTCAC has proposed as their treasure goals, and that is to empower the individuals in distressed communities and to build wealth for all Californians. Please reconsider how this is going to impact us. You know, lastly, in closing, I'm proud to be a Californian. I'm proud of how we are considered progressive in many ways. But I believe that this will be the most regressive move we have done, because not just will this impact our community of people with disabilities and the housing industry, but what next? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. All right, Ajuro Okoro.
Hi there, thank you. My name is Adro. I am the policy director for the Sacramento Housing Alliance, and just want to again thank everyone who's remained on the call and the staff for all the work you guys have put in under the conditions and just making time to let our voices be heard. The Sacramento Housing Alliance, we will be submitting written comments in addition to the comments that we're making today, specifically regarding accessibility and the definitions of seniors. We want to, again, just lift up the voices of our colleagues who have, again, talked about accessibility requirements for the program. In California, 17.9% of lower income households include someone with an ambulatory limitation, and 12.8% include someone with a hearing or a visual disability. Just in understanding of this documented need, TCAC is proposing to cut these requirements, as we've discussed and want to oppose, and from 10% to 5%, as well as the 4% set aside for the visually impaired. We need to make sure that we at least maintain these set asides for the limited amount of accessible units that are already on the market. All state agencies have a duty to affirmatively further fair housing, and why it's clear with people with disabilities have a disproportionate challenge in finding affordable housing, this proposal will exacerbate this challenge. And so it's been stated that this change is that staff routinely grant waivers to this requirement, and that the change will reduce these costs. Neither of these reasons justified this change. Specifically speaking to developers in our region specifically, they have indicated that there's a great need for housing for people with disabilities that is adapted, and that the costs required to comply are minor compared with the overwhelming costs to families and people with disabilities will be harmed by reducing housing opportunities. Further, rather than identifying whether granting of waivers is appropriate, the TCAC proposes to just eliminate this requirement. No effort is made to analyze these particular hardships and the disparate impact that this change will have on individuals who have disabilities. And again, lastly, we want to discuss the serious limited financial resources. It's appropriate to target TCAC funding to households of lesser need that are within the 55 age range. The reason provided for this change is the confusing definitions, and we recommend providing clear guidance and leaving the senior definition at 62. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, Nikki Diaz.
Yes, hello. Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great, okay, so I would like to, I'm Nikki Diaz, and I've been involved with several advocate groups over the time, and now I just am out here advocating on my own. I would like to state that I'm really concerned about this cut that's coming in. I went through a homeless situation back in 2018. I was homeless for 89 days. I was picked up by a program that thankfully took me in and into county county motel housing for the 89 days that I was without a place to live. This was all new to me. I lost my husband. That was my primary caregiver of 15 years. So I had to rush out and get my life together and pick up my feet and make myself stand up on my own. But when I discovered how much there was a deficiency for my community, I began to really, dig my heels in and find out what I could do to make my life count. And so I did that. I'm in a roundabout way, let me just shorten this. I signed up for a new housing development in Glendale, California for strictly disabled artists. Before the building was even opened up, I became available to a waiting list. I'm number 2900, which we now know, now that it's been filled up before it even opened, I'm not going to get in for years. So after that, as I struggled through several ways in trying to find housing over a year and a half, finally became homeless and was picked up by, like I said, DHS. And they put me in a program where I was able to find an apartment here in the city of Los Angeles under Department of Health Services, Measure H. The company's called Brilliant Corners. They've been great at helping me out with my rent, but to be honest with you, what I had to go through was uncalled for, and I'm not alone. I ended up coming to the point where I just settled for the apartment that I have. There's no bathroom access for me. I've not taken a shower in I don't know how long. I can get into the front door, which is why I had no choice but to take this one. There was nothing available out there. I'm even under the impression that there are empty units that are not available to me but are accessible physically. So I don't understand why you would want to cut. We are a community of people that are struggling. We are in our condition, sometimes naturally born this way, sometimes not. It comes on later. We are forced to be on an income for physical reasons that is not sufficient enough for us to live on. There's affordable housing, quote unquote, if I could physically put up finger quotes for you, I would, that really doesn't work, honestly, in a way where it would suffice us to be independent and live with a roof over our head. These are not difficult requests that we need. These are not difficult, impossible things that we're asking for. They're not things that we're asking for luxury, basic human living. It's my right in this wonderful country to live under a roofed apartment. It's not hard. So I'm glad that I'm here, but what it took for me to fight here is insane. I should not have fought as hard as I did. The crying, the nights in the motel, the inability to, to have to afford the rent, standing in line, waiting for years, knowing that I may never get in, taking that chance. I mean, it's a lot, and I can't believe that you would want to cut it. We should be priority. My community of people should be priority. Bottom line, we are not capable of out there working the way you are, or the way anybody else is that can get on their own 2 feet and do it. Some of us do work yet, thankfully. There are some of my friends that work really hard at what they do to stay independent. But some of us don't have that luxury. And at this point, it's a luxury in my condition. I reject this. Please stop cutting us.
Thank you, Nikki. So it doesn't show that we have any remaining comments on the Zoom, so we're going to try the phone one last time.
You have 1 question remaining.
This is Colleen DeLille again. I just wanted to say one more thing. And this is about self-examination and being realistic about what we're dealing with today. It's time for us to stop making the assumption that expenditures to accommodate the entire range of the human condition are a waste of time and money. Everybody has value. Everybody contributes in their way. And so what we need to say, we should stop making decisions about accessibility based on how much it costs. We need to plan for the entire range of the human condition and value all humans. Thank you.
You have 0 questions remaining.
Okay, I think that we've received all the comments. And again, you can submit comments in writing, and we appreciate all of the comments today. It's been really helpful. And as Judith mentioned, we will take a look at, we'll revisit these comments, and, we'll be in touch. Thank you. Judith.
Absolutely, and I just want to remind you all that we were going to be discussing these also on the 18th of November. No, we're not going to be discussing on 18th.
Well, these would be up for proposal or up to the committee for vote. It would be in December, but
it will be up for the committee in December, but you can also discuss them on the 18th, which is the next public hearing. So I just want to mention that as well. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.